clarifications, maybe we can get back to some sort of semblance of what we were before. Makes greater sense. But this idea that we are creatures of trauma, physiological trauma, that then creates psychological trauma, has been picked up by certain scholars. Kelly Kellogg emphasizes the fact that abusive behaviors, whether we direct them towards ourselves, other people, or other species, are not natural to human beings. People enact such behaviors, he says, because something unnatural has happened to them. I and they have become deranged. Now, the schizophrenia was studied by two major people. Two major scholars are experts in schizophrenia. One is your American, Julian Jaynes, and the other is the eccentric psychologist from England, who's now passed away, R.D. Laing. But Julian Jaynes, Jack Barringer in his book Past Shock says of Jaynes claimed that this period, thousands of years ago, was a time of intense psychosis for the emerging human race. Terence McKenna picks up on it and says that Jaynes has suggested that human consciousness has changed its character even in recent historical times. The ego as we know it was not really in existence except under extreme stress. These are scientists who've discovered this through their testing of people. And then it presented itself almost as an exterior intrusion into consciousness, like the voice of a god. Of course, these scholars don't tell you what the trauma was. I do. I know what the trauma was, and it was so severe that consciousness as we know it was shattered forever. Except in a few genius types who have a little bit of access, like voices from the distance, like echoes from the past, are the great geniuses of our time. But most of us, no, it's very, very, and of course we live in a world, make sure we're going to be conditioned into this hyper-linear, very, very hyper-focused left brain type of mentality. David Watson, in his book Pathology of Civilization, says that we reproduce catastrophe because we ourselves are traumatized, both as a species and individually, beginning at birth. Because we are wounded, we have put up psychic defenses against reality and have become so cut off from direct participation in the multidimensional wilderness in which we are embedded that all we can do is to navigate our way cautiously through a humanly designed day-to-day substitute world of symbols, a world of dollars, minutes, numbers, images, and words that are constantly being manipulated to wring the most possible profit from every conceivable circumstance. The body and the spirit both rebel. Of course they rebel. But we were so traumatized that we kind of now have a fear of nature. Heavily co-opted by the media, by the way. But we have a bit of a suspicion of that old nature because from one point of view, it seemed to do wrong by us. Our earth was just being destroyed under our feet like the worst Charlton Heston disaster movie you've ever seen. My goodness. So after that, you see, the ego could say, no, you trust me. Forget all of that stuff. You listen to me. I'm the way shower. I'm the light holder. I'm the one who leads you to security and stability. And we were so traumatized, we've done it. But look at the effects of that now. Now, R.D. Laing says that's something incredible. As a psychologist, he turned the whole of psychology upside down. He said, insanity is a perfectly natural adjustment to a totally unnatural and negative environment. It's just an adjustment like anything else. If your world is irrational and insane, and you're doing your best to adjust to it, but the result is insanity, don't blame the schizoid person. Schizophrenia is an adjustment, like all mental disease, and even like crime. It's merely a symptom, so don't treat the symptom. Schizophrenia is coined by Eugene Bleuler, and it roughly translates as shattered mind, coming from the Greek schizo, to split or to divide. But remember, these psychotic states are just a compensation. They're a desperate attempt to find a sanity. And the whole human race has been doing it, not just individuals. The psychosis is globalized. And the great genius, of course, Sigmund Freud, who had looked into the psyche deeper probably than almost any other human being, he's discovered something incredible about the split. And his language is even better. He says that starting from speculations on the beginning of life and from biological parallels, meaning he studied physical things, I drew the conclusion that besides the instinct to preserve living substance, there must exist another contrary instinct seeking to dissolve those units and bring them back to their primeval inorganic state. That is to say, as well as eros, there was an instinct of death. And he called that the Thanatos complex. And you'll see in a minute why we're going into this much detail about the death instinct. But Gnostics would always say, hey, we know all about that. We know about the troublesome ego. Thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago, we have the Gnostics who said, yes, that's Lucifer. That's the God that, thinks he's God. That's not the real God. That's what they call the demiurge, the king of the world, Rex Mundi. That's your problem. They knew that. I prefer to use more simple language and get this message through to people. Let's stop thinking that we think with the mind. Let's get around the idea that we think for the mind. Get out of the idea that the ego, the mind, the thing you think your thoughts with, is unique to yourself. That's a luxury. But it's also a lie, by the way. We're thinking for the mind, not with it. Your great Alan Watts, he said, we seldom realize, for example, that our most private thoughts and emotions are not actually our own. For we think in terms of languages and images which we did not invent, but which were given to us by our society. We copy emotional reactions from our parents. Society is our extended mind and body. Absolutely, he's right. Well, your name is borrowed, your religion is borrowed, your clothes are borrowed, your ideas are borrowed. Tell me what's unique. Every human being can clearly know what it is that makes them the same as everybody else. We all support the same team. We all vote the same way. We all like such and such. Very few people can tell you what really makes them unique. We belong to schools where they couldn't care less what makes you unique, unless it serves the beast, of course. Then they're very interested. And let's plug into this. Let's overlay on what I'm just saying about the origins of the ego something else that needs to be taken into consideration. Up until recent historical times, and I mean recent, agricultural age, industrial age, up until recent times, life expectancy of the average human being was between 20 and 25 years of age. So psychologically, if you have a very short physical life, then psychologically, the human being did not progress much further than what is known as the animistic or infantile phase, basically about 13-year-old teenager, at best. So therefore his world was therefore one of superstition and wild and uncontrollable emotionality and fear of the unknown. The rational apparatus, which affords us a truer reckoning of objective reality, is therefore an exceedingly recent development. And many people in today's world are just as psychologically primitive and as arrested as those rural ancestors, by the way. Hence, the rise of this evangelism and conservative politics. See, in those days it was just devils or gods. It was very easy, right? If somebody didn't take water from the well right, you burned them at the stake. Listen, some Latin American countries, it's the same story. In India, where one of my side of the family's from, they're fanatics, they're maniacs. You wear the wrong clothes, the wrong color on the wrong day, and they're ready to execute you. But that is a very comfortable world to just have everything in demons and gods, you see. And now it's being handed out again. Man, I say, is the rational animal, so to speak. He alone can say, I, and can contemplate his own existence and behavior and actively seek to effect change. Animal can't do that. Animal's not thinking about that. They have their own intelligence, though, don't get me wrong. I'm not denigrating the animal. But we are the only ones who can think about ourselves and think about thought. Now, this capacity is obviously called independence. Have you ever thought about the meaning of that word? But the opposite of that is called collectivism. But this unique capacity of independence is threatening to the establishment who does not wish man to become aware of the two forms of manipulation which contravene his independent thought and action. As Alan Watts said, the most strongly enforced of all known taboos is the taboo against knowing who and what you really are behind the mask of your apparently separate, independent, and isolated ego. The taboo against knowing who you are? You mean to tell me we're going to reach 25 years of age, voting age, working age, and marriage age, but we don't know who we all are? Wonderful. That's great. And then we turn around wondering why the world is in the state it's in? Marvelous. So we address this problem. That we know that there's untold cruelty from the earliest times. From James Hillman, the Canadian psychologist and friend of Carl Jung, he said that archaeology supports the view that warfare is a development of only the past 10,000 years. Oh, that's a blink of the eye, 10,000 years. Of course, it ties into research of people like myself who are saying, well, we were visited. We were genetically tampered with. And now these psychologists and even some of the scientists are starting to back that up. Because I very much believe that, believe me, these penchants for violence, they're not something that's natural to human beings at all. He goes on to say that, look, the normal round of warfare has been going on as far back as memory stretches. But during the last 5,000 or so years, 14,600 wars have been recorded. There's barely a day off before we're butchering somebody else. Schlein, who's a San Francisco scientist, top of the totem pole. has been looking into the goddess tradition and divination and what it's all about with the feminine concept. Because the old paradigms are simply not working anymore. So scientists are, not because they want to, believe me, it's because they're forced to. He says that Eve's descendants have steadily accumulated the power to destroy each other in an unholy Armageddon, and like sleepwalkers are shuffling towards a planetary ecological disaster. But how could a slight, 5-foot-tall, 2-legged animal create such sublimity and then wreak so much havoc in so minuscule an interval of Earth history? As I've always said, the question of evil is one of the most important questions that we could ever ask. It's number one on the list. Erich Fromm, the post-Neo-Freudian, says that the detailed description of the life of primitive hunters and food gatherers has shown that man, at least since he fully emerged 50,000 years ago, was most likely not the brutal, destructive, cruel being, and hence not the prototype of man the killer that we find in more developed stages of his evolution. So there's another lie out the door. Oh, well, we're violent because, that's just the way it is. It's evolution. No, it's not evolution. And that big question that so many people have asked, sitting around the coffee table, but the scientists are asking it. The malcontents are asking it. What is the real difference between man and beast? The only thing I say to that is, do we really want the answer? I mean, really. Because man does differ from the animal by the fact that he is the killer. He, the only primate that kills and tortures members of his own species without any reason, either biological or economic, and who feels satisfaction in doing so. Animals will eat each other, but they don't murder each other. It is this biologically non-adaptive and non-phylogenetically programmed malignant aggression, because there's healthy forms of aggression as well. But this is malignant aggression that constitutes the real problem and danger to man's existence as a species. Don't we know it? Because the most ample, he says, and horrifying documentation for seemingly spontaneous forms of destructiveness are on the record of civilized history. The history of war is a report of ruthless and indiscriminate killing and torture, whose victims are men, women, and children. Many of these occurrences give the impression of orgies of destruction, in which neither conventional nor genuinely moral factors have any inhibitory effect. There is hardly a destructive act human imagination could think of that has not been acted out again and again. Schlein says that creation is in fact a nightmare spectacle taking place on a planet that has been soaked in the blood of all of its creatures. The soberest conclusion that we can make is that this planet is being turned into a vast pit of fertilizer. Actually, it is. And those who have studied the ritualistic component of these killings, the world is still to wake up to that. But there are people who've been studying that. They will understand what that statement in fact does mean. Fromm goes on to say, only man seems to take pleasure in destroying life without any reason or purpose other than that of destroying. Remember Freud? There's two sides. There's the instinct of death and the instinct for life. And we all have it. Even the most creative of people. Van Gogh can go out one day and paint pictures that will stun the world for hundreds of years, and in the same hour cut his own ear off. To put it more generally, only man appears to be destructive beyond the aim of defense or of attaining what he needs. Only man. Thomas Hobbes, and he should know because he's one of the philosophers behind our modern mass murderers, I'll be doing a DVD in the future called Evil's Willing Servants, in which I'll be dealing with these hidden people, the Leo Strausses, the Rothschilds, the Thomas Hobbes types people, some of the people, that they're camera shy. And they're philosophers, they're teachers. And the young men, like the Bushes and the Wolfowitz, they serve these individuals. And they want to get into politics to execute the philosophies of people that you don't know about and are not meant to know about. You've heard of Wilson, but you ain't heard of Colonel Mandel House. So we have to find out who are the architects of deception behind the scenes. Very important. Hobbes says that the state of peace among men living side by side is not a natural state. The natural state is one of war. There are people who believe that. In the French philosopher Joseph de Maistre believed it. He said, I'd say, gentlemen, that dictatorship is a legitimate form of government. Dictatorship, indeed, is part of the divine order. No questions about it. These are the top philosophers of the ages. And we have people executing right now their philosophies. Another psychopath was Juan Donoso Cortés. He says the culmination of Donoso's philosophical treatise is that the institution of bloody sacrifice is the most universal of all human dogmas and institutions. The most civilized nations and the most savage tribes believe in a pure victim offered as a perfect holocaust. Without the death penalty, without the purifying efficacy of blood, all societal bonds would collapse. So they're saying if you've got civilization, it's based on sacrifice. And there's people who believe that and are operating accordingly right now. Of course, it won't matter to you until your daughter or son goes missing. Then it'll matter. And coming more to the point, we have something important that's going to happen this year. We're talking about Mayan countdowns, and 13-year cycles, and age of revealing, and all of that. Well, listen. If you haven't felt it before, it's going to start happening soon. In November of this year, and for the whole of 2007, all the way up to 2012, there's a very major cycle that's going to begin. We've been talking about time and cycle and all of that. Well, there's another cycle you need to know about that's approaching us very, very soon. And it's the coming in of the planet Pluto. Now, I wish I could get more into the concept that when I'm talking about the planets, I'm not talking about the effects of rocks in space with magic rays. People who know my work on astrology know that I know about an inner zodiac. The whole idea is that these rocks in space just represent energies. They are not the thing itself. So don't get me wrong there. But Pluto is an archetype that represents a certain kind of energy that is actually psychological in nature. That's all I can say for now. People can contact me and we can go into greater depth. There's information on the Taroscope's website more about what I mean by these planets and zodiacs. Anyway, we have the planet Pluto. But what is Pluto? What does it matter that it's coming in? Because in November of this year, it's going to be crossing galactic center and channeling energy from the center of the galaxy. And that's in late Sagittarius. Pluto, the planet of destruction, and I prefer the word deconstruction, because really, if you think about it, nothing is ever destroyed. It's just transmuted. And radical change will be crossing galactic center and channeling that energy of the central sun in early 2007. It takes approximately 250 years for Pluto to complete one circuit of the zodiac, or 12 signs. We saw the 12 signs. Well, now think of one planet moving very, very slowly. Because the sun and Mercury and Venus and some of the other planets we know, they move very, very quickly. And their effects then are very, very sort of short-lived. Even though if you're sensitive, you can always feel them. That's what astrology is all about, is the mapping and charting of the effects of these bodies. But Pluto moves very slowly and has very, very dramatic effect. Now, Pluto is presently approximately 24 degrees of Sagittarius. Please excuse me if you're not familiar with this astrological jargon. And when it moves into Capricorn, the sign of order and government, Capricorn, right, the sign of order and government, it will augur in cataclysmic upheavals and exposure of all corruption in order to restore harmony. In fact, a lot of what you're seeing in the exposures recently have been because it's moving in. It's already coming. Its orbit is 250 years, so about 3-4 years ago, already what you might even say the turn of the millennium, let's say, already the effects of Pluto have been felt. But it's going to get stronger and stronger and stronger, like a dimmer turning up. It augurs in the exposure of all corruption in order to restore harmony and a higher way of being. Individual lives will also be dramatically transformed. Pluto comes to check psychic immunity. We all know about physical immunity. If you don't have it, you get a disease, right? Pluto is the surgeon coming in to say, roll up the sleeve, say ah. It's going to check the psychic immunity. And it brings with it a deep cleansing cycle. One can think of it as nature's psychic surgeon. It's interesting, too, because it is connected. Pluto is connected to psychology. Pluto was discovered in 1930, but it had been searched for at about 1900, exactly the time that Sigmund Freud started writing and releasing and publishing his works. Pluto, I believe, is the planetary ruler of Germany, but it is very much the ruler of psychology. And I've always thought it's interesting that the word sanity comes from the same word roots as sanitize, meaning that if you're not sanitized, you're not sane. What do I mean by that? We clean everything in our world. We wouldn't dream of eating off the same dirty plates twice. We make our beds, we take showers, we clean the driveway, right? In Ireland, they're out there polishing their cars on Sunday morning, groom the dog. Everything in our life is clean. How come not our emotions? How come they're as toxic as hell and we're walking around loose in the world thinking, we got problems, let me fix it? Ever try cleaning a nice clean window with an oily rag and then saying you can't see the garden? Well, the oily rag in your hand is the one messing up the window. So if we're finding disorder and chaos in the world, could it be our smudge, our forensic mess that we're leaving behind? Could be in the eye of the beholder, as they say. Now, Robert Hand, the astrologer, says that the nature of Pluto is similar to that of the Hindu god Shiva. It's an interesting statement. Pluto usually begins by breaking down a structure, then creates a new one in its place. The entire cycle of death, destruction, and renovation is accompanied by tremendous powers. For Pluto is not a mild or even very subtle planetary influence. It brings decay at one level or another. Pluto also rules death and regeneration of the self. As old aspects of your life pass away, Pluto does not represent death in the literal sense. Instead, it refers to a metaphorical death, something that ceases to be. And those who know about this stuff know that when you're feeling the effects of Pluto, it's going to be in your relationships that you're going to feel it first. Forget about Capitol Hill and White House and all of that. You're going to feel it much closer to home. But he mentions Shiva the Destroyer, the third god of the Hindu Trinity. Now, we don't have too much insight into the sane mind, but we can certainly recognize the unsane mind. At least that much we can do. But in short, the schizophrenic mind creates a schizogenic society. You don't need to be Freud to know that. The pathological mind creates a pathogenic society. The toxic mind sees and creates a toxic world. And we can recognize it on the big scale. But can you recognize it closer to home? Actually, no, we can't. Barbara Hahn-Clow in her Palladian Agenda says, you all have miasmas in your bodies that you must release. These are etheric masses that hold memory from genetic past lives. They're disease patterns. And we feel uncomfortable with them. It's time to get rid of them. But we really don't want to do that. We escape from it. That's right, avoidance and tranquilization. We don't want to do all that psychology and self-investigation. Where's the authority figures who will just lead us where we need to go? They'll teach us all how to do it. But don't you see that by your avoidance to deal with your dark psychic content, that you are in fact funding and permitting the most hideous leviathans to poison and intoxicate the human race? Because they will step on to the white square of the chessboard if you don't occupy it. Then don't blame them for their existence if you have allowed them to rise. Now Pluto is, of course, anyone here Scorpio? Sun sign Scorpio? Right. Then you know obviously that Pluto is your ruling planet. Pluto is your god of the sign of Scorpio. And therefore, where is Scorpio in the seasonal cycle? Right? It's late. It's at the winter cycle. So Pluto rules when the sun goes into the winter seasonal cycle. And it's the same thing psychologically. Pluto rules what is known as the Underworld Cycle in alchemy or psychology. And of course, we all go through the Underworld Cycle, whether we know about astrology or not. It's often been called in the New Age movement the dark night of the soul. Carl Jung said that the foundation of mental illness, all mental illness, is unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. Because we resist a certain amount of this looking at the dark side, especially of ourselves, and a willing entrance into, because remember, all of us are going through the dark night of the soul, and we'll have to go through this underworld phase, just as the sun has to go through its one seasonally. You're not going to escape it. The only difference is that you can either decide to do it of your own free will, then it's ritualistic, or you can be dragged. The hanged man has a smile on his lips. It's a willing oblation. Did not Odin, when he hung on the tree of life in order to learn the secret of the runes, he did it willingly. Nobody forced Buddha to sit down in front of the tree when he wanted to contemplate the meaning of life. It's a Conan and the Barbarian situation. You must willingly be crucified and die to be reborn again. Of course, we've forgotten all of those rituals, but nevertheless it goes through your life. It's not that suffering is good. Suffering is built into the universe. You're going to have it just like you have pleasure. It's your unwillingness, unwholesome unwillingness to deal with it and to accept it for what it is, which is like the sword saying, I don't want to go through the fire of the blacksmith. Well, then you're not a sword, period. Now, countries go through these great cycles. The seasons go through it, and so do the psyche. In psychological terms, though, Pluto, Shiva, represents what is known in consciousness as the shadow self. Now, you see, in the schemata of the consciousness, we're out here. We're out here in the realm of persona, which is the word for mask. We're out here in the Hollywood drama, right? The mask, the show of masks. And we become so identified with this extreme edge of consciousness, the fashions, what are we going to look like, appearances, and the whole 9 yards. Now, of course, a certain amount of persona we need. Otherwise, we'll be wide open to attack. You need the mask in order to conceal your real identity, to protect yourself and to operate in the world with other fellow human beings. But we have way overcompensated for it. We've put all our psychic energy into the mask. And you only have to look at the cosmetic commercials to know that it's obsessive right now. Behind that is the ego, the waking consciousness. And this little battery runs down every 12 hours or so you need to sleep. That's because it's finite and it's energy, and you need to sleep to restore its energy. When we wake up in the morning, we have a thing called ego consciousness, ego waking consciousness. But the ego is a strange kind of thing. As I said, it's kind of young and reckless and wild, as well as very domineering. And anything that your ego or you do not like about yourself, you repress. And the repressions of all the stuff that you despise about yourselves becomes what's known as the shadow personality. And it's kind of in the unconscious realm. It's not even in the conscious realm because you're not aware of it. It's like the director's cut of your life. See, when you're living your life and experiencing all sorts of things, you want to have the nice clips that you cut out and put them on the coffee table, the family album. But what about the backstory that's really been filmed, that footage that you hide away? That one day when you leave this planet is going to be played for you in the dark room. They're going to say, come this way. We've got something to show you. Remember all that film you stored away in the attic, meaning your unconscious mind? We're going to run you an amazing film here. This is a real slasher horror one. This is Stephen King and more. You want to see the John Carpenter, Friday the 13th, part 14? Here it is. The shadow is the repressed stuff that we don't show to the world, and we even forget. Now, for those who find it hard to understand what repression is, it's forgetting something and then forgetting that you forgot about it. It's the skeletons in the closet. And again, it's a very necessary part of the human mind. We need it to survive. It's like the dumpster. You need to throw the trash out. But we've, again, overcompensated. We're doing it too much. And it causes enormous psychic problems. Carl Jung said that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. For no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. He's talking spiritually there. He's saying that for you to be integrated, you're going to need to integrate with your shadow, because those are aspects of yourself that you've thrown away. And you're not getting to the light. See, the self, the true person, is way back here. For the hell, you can forget about the self. We're into ego world. And the ego is doing itself a disservice by constantly denying aspects of its own self. Now, you know something? There was books left out of the Bible, and it's important to start finding out why. Jesus said in the Gospel of Thomas, this is one of the great Gnostic Gospels that was thrown away, when you see your likeness, you rejoice. But when you see your images which come into existence before you, which neither die nor are made manifest, how much will you bear? Now, it's very flowery language, a different language, but can you see now what is being said here? When you see your likeness, you rejoice. Meaning when you're in the persona, and you're in the world of, I play the fashion game, and everybody then gives me acknowledgement, and I give acknowledgement, you rejoice. But when you see the primordial images which come into existence before you, but these which are neither die or are made manifest, meaning the unconscious mind, how much then will you bear? It's an old story. And the teacher, remember, the threat. You know what the teacher does? He goes, project on me. Come on, dump it on me. And we do. And the teacher's job is to take all of that. As Carlos Castaneda and other writers have shown. The teacher is he's the guy we're going to bury in the sand, as we've done so many times before. The shadow is very powerful. It is a moral problem. It destroys relationships, and it destroys the teacher relationship with the one who's receiving the teaching. Yeah, looking at who we are, that's all it's about. The only solution is to look at who we are. As Alexander Pope said, know then thyself. Presume not God to scan. The proper study of man is man. William Blake said, thine own humanity learn to adore. But Carl Jung put it this way. He said, look, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop from facing their souls. Ever been outside recently? Ever turned on the TV recently? He's exactly right. People will do anything, no matter how absurd. And all that carnival that you see out there and all the distraction and nonsense that this world is wall-to-wall full of, that's what he's talking about. I must live in the Bahamas. I must live in a one-season world. I don't want to be looking at any of that stuff. Well, then okay. But then you've just condemned the world to horrors. You're just making a person in your life, your partner or your children, the victims, the slaves to your inability to face yourself. You're now having a person fill your void and your emptiness because you're not a whole person. And now you've enslaved that wife or that husband or that child or that animal or your workmates to your own form of tyranny. Yeah, you can't call the police on it, and you'll never get the court over it to prove that it's there, but it's there. And basically, repression doesn't work. There's a thing known as the return of the repressed. You can only dump so much of it before the stench starts to, come back. And as Carl Jung said in a well-known statement, he said, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it appears outside of you as fate. Ha, ha, ha. Because there's a strange contract between the unconscious energy of our minds and the world, the energy that built the world. They conspire together. They're built out of the same stuff. So behind the back of the ego, the unconscious mind, the shadow, conspires with life, with material existence, to bring in front of you the very people, the very person, the very challenges, right? To help you integrate when you won't do it of your own free will. And we call that living. All the stuff that happens around us that we often describe as difficult challenges, that's what that is. We will refuse to do the homework, so then we're going to meet it in space and time. As the Greek said, your character is your fate. Now the next statement from Carl Jung is the one that is basically the theme of the entire presentation. Very important statement, and it is the crux of all of the work that I do, and all of the work that I will continue to do in this field. This is it, because I am not a person who will leave consciousness at the door. I am fully aware of all of the other obscenities that are taking place, in the name of God, in the name of religion, in the name of freedom and sovereignty. But you see, in my book, I will not leave consciousness at the door. And this is the reason. Carl Jung says that the gigantic catastrophes that threaten us today are not elemental happenings of a physical or biological order, but are psychic events. To a quite terrifying degree, we are threatened by wars and revolutions, which are nothing other than psychic epidemics. At any moment, several millions of human beings may be smitten with a new madness. And then we shall have another world war or devastating revolution. Instead of being at the mercy of wild beasts, earthquakes, landslides, and inundations, modern man is battered by the elemental forces of his own psyche. It's just that the other stuff, the symptoms of this, you can take a Polaroid of it. You can catch it on film. And you can call physical police to handle it. But there is a far greater form of violence going on that we are still to educate ourselves in. And it just so happens that the most toxic and unworked people just happen to be in power. So we've just diagnosed them. They just happen to be the ones most infected by the epidemic. And they're walking loose and hoping that you'll catch it too. But they're not what we first think that they are. They're not just mad politicians, whatever. These are people who have an epidemic. And they happen to always rule the societies because we let them. We permit it to happen. The masses of men and women in the Western world compulsively avoid true, authentic, and psychoanalytical investigations of their natures, even with help. Particularly in regards to the so-called darker aspects of the personality, the shadow self, and so on. However, not dealing with the psyche at all proves systemically hazardous. So a compromise is required. So the ego is not stupid. It knows to continually be dumping without any integration will create total pathology. So it thinks, I'm going to get poisoned by all the stench coming from the back alley. And, we want the house to look good in the front for the neighbors. But this stench is, creeping in. People going, is there something rotting around here? So it has to find a way of coming, doing some dumping, so to speak. So a compensation had to be found. And hence the proliferation of the New Age philosophy and movement, together with its many permutations. Riddled with ego-customized shams and gimmicks, the application of its methods serve, for the most part, to merely bolster the failing ego and its drives. You create inauthentic versions of cleansing, but might do a little topical spring cleaning without going too deep. It's called religion, or New Age movement. Western man has made himself bereft of the rites and rituals, the rites of passage, the shamanic methods for dealing with the build-up of his dark psychic content. As a result, he is patently psychologically arrested. His avoidance condemns mankind and the earth. It engenders psychotic and sadistic leaders who are able to play upon his fears and lower instincts ad infinitum. So we're getting to the core of it now. If we do not autonomously cleanse our psyches and strive to live morally, and if we continue to violate the natural order, remember I said nature goes through these cycles, it can handle the winter when everything dies and putrefies, because it knows what beautiful roses are going to come from that. Nature can do it, but we can't. And if we continue to violate the natural order because of our inner emotional and psychological toxicity, we will allow the ego to manifest surrogate channels to exorcise its repressions and other negative debris. In short, if we give up the right rulership of the self, we inevitably breed Orwellian political and religious tyrants to take over the job and turn us into what George Simmel, the psychologist, sociologist, said, smiling depressives, or worse. And there's two other proclivities, capacities that we have in our minds. In our ego consciousness, we also have two very important things. And again, both necessary, but we've taken them to extremes. And they're called projection and inflation. And the place where we can really examine them is in our relationships. The dark aspects of the personal psyche, which threaten the ego's autonomy and its vision of itself, are repressed, as we said. The shadow is the sum of all that we loathe about ourselves, and we project it onto other people and say they're responsible. This content is subconsciously projected onto others who become our external representatives of our personal shadow selves. In extreme cases, we also project this content through the field of other oblivious victims. That's an important one, but we're not going to get into it now. I'm working on a DVD and a website called Psychic Vampirism. You can go to psychicvampirism.com, and I've got something that's coming out that's going to be monumental on that, but we certainly can't visit that today. And additionally, there is the collective psyche and its dark content, which is at certain times likewise projected. So you do it with your individual mind, but we all do it collectively at certain phases in history. We literally all project on the famous nemesis that's created for us. And the politicians, they know how to manipulate that. We want the easy way out, and they have the pulse on the psyche, and they know how to help us with that kind of false exorcism. They're experts at it. I've always maintained in my work that if you don't know the motives of your enemy, then don't go into fight. You may know your motives, but if you don't know what makes them tick, we have zero knowledge of them. I've said it in the book and I've said it in many talks. They have incredible knowledge of us. We don't even know what makes them tick. It's time to start finding out. That's like arming up to go and fight, find a tiger to shoot, but you don't have a faintest idea. In your mind, the tiger is a pink animal that flies in the sky. You don't know it's a thing with, inch-long razor-sharp teeth that's going to tear you limb from limb and can smell you coming 10 miles away. What good is it then you fighting the tiger? You're dead and buried and eaten is what's going to happen to you. Which is what has been happening to the brothers and sisters who've been trying to stand up against these leviathans, unfortunately. As I said, when we are not integrated, strong, and healthy psychologically, we invariably turn to external representatives. The parents, the politicians, the teachers, the evangelists, the heroes, the authority figures, the establishment representatives, whoever. And all manner of horrors have arisen because we do this. So yes, our world is full of horror and genocide and mayhem. Let's start discovering why. The approach of Pluto now will arouse fear, paranoia, and the whole cocktail of these darker emotions. That's why we're having this talk. It's because, you see, we're not going to get away with it any more. Very soon now, it's already actually been happening, but get ready for it. Now, these effects can confuse you. They can confuse and threaten both protagonist and antagonist. See, you may not be a generator or even a creator of dark, toxic energy too much, right? But you certainly will be the receiver of it from those who are. So you're going to have to know about what's coming, because if you don't, and the masks start coming down, and this toxicity starts coming out in people around you that you think you love, or that they've been fooling you into thinking that they love you, let's put it that way, you're going to be very shocked, and as a result, might do something very off or wrong, or you can be destabilized. And I don't want that to happen. I believe that the good people should have good times ahead. Shouldn't be again having to start from scratch again. Well, we can help that happen by having some knowledge about what might be coming down tomorrow, so that you're not completely shattered. Subsequently, the individuals will feel deeply insecure and as a result tend to cleave even more vehemently to the known and familiar Saturnian archetypes. And the one I'm most concerned with and thinking about the most is known as the Animus, which is a Latin word for the father, or more colloquially, Big Daddy. Very important archetype that make up ego consciousness. And very, very prevalent in the world. Big Daddy is what it's known as. And it has the most important effect. As we understand what our egos are doing, we'll understand why we create. Now, of course, we know that what is Big Daddy? It's nothing more than a re-scripting of the old Jehovah. I mean, this is an old deal we're talking about here. Now, look at the relationship of Jehovah to the so-called chosen people. It wasn't because they, wove the great tapestries, or they made the best sandals, or that they built great empires, or made great jewelry, or great lovers of women, or whatever. What was the reason why Jehovah was protecting, loving, and adoring the chosen people? One word. They were obedient. The relationship between the Father and the Son, you see, is one of obedience. That's what gets you the power and security that the Father offers you. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. The Bible is telling you about the Animus. The Bible is telling you what God and this Father figure is. It's belligerent. Remember, you're going to it because you want protection, because you have no security inside yourself. And it's going to do its number. It's going to do its dance. Don't blame it. It's doing what it was paid to do. Paid with psychological energy. There's one other important psychological complex that we need to look at, and that's called identification. And we all do it. You have to identify with your heroes and things, otherwise, you couldn't survive. Identification is that you identify with your parents and the good side of, your heroes and so on and so forth. So it's a natural, healthy drive. But again, it's taken to extremes in certain situations. The extreme of it is known as the identification with the object of one's hate. The identification with the object of one's hate? Meaning you hate something, but you identify with it? Why would you do that? Now, when states and people are unhealthy and not sovereign, they give their power away to demagogues and champions who possess the ability to lead them anywhere. The slave has an ambivalent relationship with the master. He may despise the master, but he may also envy him and need his attention and affection. Because we do need. We are in dependence. You are a slave of the approval and the needs of others. And if you don't have it, look what happens to you. Now, the slave has an inferiority complex and does not think or act for himself. In fact, he prefers that others do the thinking for him. In return for this, he offers service, work, and above all, obedience. It's the master versus slave. Now, see, of course, hate is in the eyes of both. The whole relationship is based on hate. But the slave is thinking, this guy can kill me. So, instead of death, slavery, death. All right, done deal, slavery. Just give me a few cushions every time, once in a while for my prison cell. And a little salt in my bowl of gruel, and I'm happy. Give me chains of iron instead of gold, and hey, brother, go and do whatever you want. Go and murder and mutilate in my name. I don't care. I'm happy. Glenn Parton said, "We have internalized our masters," which is a well-known psychological response to trauma. See, trauma again. When faced with the overwhelming terror, haven't we heard that word recently? Quite a lot. The human mind splits, with part of itself modeling itself after the oppressor. It is an act of appeasement. Look, you're saying, I'm like you, so don't harm me. Simply called identification. A New York Times CBS poll noted that only 6% opposed military action, while a substantial majority favored war, even if many thousands of innocent civilians are killed. Simultaneously, Bush's approval rating has soared. Like all tyrants and demagogues, Adolf Hitler didn't force himself into power, he was voted in. Identification with the object of one's hate. Here's a couple of extreme examples of it, because this thing takes many forms. A female, in fact, identification complex is very much in the female, is an aspect of the female psyche. Here's two extreme examples of it to make the point. Say, for instance, you have a very ambivalent relationship with the father, because the father, and rightly so, the father has in fact wounded you at some point in your youth. And you have a primal wound created by the father left, the father hurt you, whatever. It happens. You hate the father immensely for the wrong that he did, and you should. That hate is perfectly legitimate. But if you hate the father too much, it will often prevent a woman from integrating in society. Because the father is also the boss, you see, the senior, the state, the system. So your hate for your father prevents you from winning in the world. So then the ego now has to think, well, how do I make a compensation? So what the female psyche often does is it identifies with the object of its hate. And here's a couple of examples of it. And this is physicalizing it. where it's a woman, but it's not really a woman, it's a man. It's a person saying, I want to be male. Because I'm in deep hatred of my father, haven't worked it out, I'm not resolving it, don't know how. But I need the attention. I need to make it in the system. And if I'm in rebellious against the Saturnian system, I'm getting nowhere. And I have a healthy drive that wants to succeed and get somewhere and have a good life. So you're in a what's known as a catch-22 situation. And you resolve it in these ways that are known as sublimation. And they're extreme. It's through sublimation. And we all do this to a certain extent. You think you don't have something, or you think that you're without something, and then you find a substitute for it. This is a very powerful archetype, this identification. But there's another version of the same thing. Only we know it as rebellion. It's the opposite side of the coin. It's like, hey, I'm not playing into all of that. I hate the father and the system and all that bogus stuff. Going to school, getting up in the morning, going and getting a job, all that straight up and down square stuff. You're in hatred of it, but you're not going to identify with it. You're going to say, hey, I rebel against it. Now, you can argue which is the healthier drive. I don't know. And then you had a whole culture of it here in the 60s. But see, what is rebellion really? Isn't it really the other side of the coin of the subservience? In Rome, no one complained when Caligula made his horse the emperor. That's the identification, right, with the object of one's hate. Go ahead, do whatever you want. The rebel goes, to hell with that. I will say something. But do you see that the rebellion is still isn't it dependent on the discipline, on the father? It's still tied to the actions of the father. The rebel is healthy in a way because he's seeing the dumbed downness. He's seeing the utter control and the gaga people. They're acting like sheeple. So the rebel tries to, in his own way, as dysfunctional as it is, he's trying to say, but I don't buy into all of that. I see it as a lie. And how can you not see it as a lie? We've got a one-party system happening here. We've got blustering maniacs who are going to push it down everybody's throat with lie upon lie upon lie. Because you see, look, they say, look, you want to live in a box where you can hear the toilet flushing next door and with some slumlord, we can accommodate you. You want to pay through the nose for a useless car, we can accommodate you. You want to go ahead and live in a dead-end, get yourself a dead-end job in which you're stuck in scale labor for the rest of your life, the system can absolutely accommodate you. You want to buy into a false lie and believe a lie after lie after lie to cover the other lies, we absolutely can accommodate you. You want to live in a world where you have a political system of tyrants where you can vote for them to go and mass murder, we can accommodate you. But if you want to live in a world where you're independent and you have a healthy system, we can't accommodate you. That's the message. So the rebel goes, then I'm out of here. I don't know where I'm going or what I'm doing. You see, so it's semi-healthy. You get a medal for knowing what you don't want to do. As a tarot reader or as a diviner, as an astrologer, I can tell you that most of my clients, and I'm sure this will be corroborated by anyone else who works in this field, I'm visited by so many people who absolutely have got to that point in their life where they do not know what it is that they do know what they don't want to do. Their problem is what it is that they have to do or should be doing, their destiny. Because there's all the difference in the world between that, knowing what you don't want to do, and you get a medal for that. That's great. A lot of people never even get to that stage. But the secret of life, the magic of life, is that we often don't know what it is that we want to do. And then we make the mistake of turning to authority figures to go, they're going to tell me. The trick is that only you know what it is you want. That's the whole point. And until you create it for yourself, it's not going to be there. You can model yourself on others perhaps a little bit, and browse the field. But only you can begin the process of lighting the fuse of what you need to be. Sam Peckinpah created himself. Van Gogh, Michelangelo, the whole list. You create yourself. But they've put so many bread and circuses in front of us that we are gaga. We don't even know what's happening. Think for ourselves, we can't even get that far. They're doing the thinking for us, and they can hand us whatever they want. They can even create a faux conflict and say, look, we know you're unhappy. We know you're repressed. We know you hate our guts. But you know what? We'll give you a way to do something about it. We'll create a political system, a pigsty, in which you can go in there and cluck and chip at each other, like those cockerel fights. That's what you need to do. You need to go and do that. And that'll bring us down. So they create a fake game of dialectics for us, and then we exhaust all our energy in this political pigsty created by our masters, and then wonder why nothing moves a smegging inch forward. And they're laughing, they're having a field day, they're dancing on their desks going, these chumps bought into this? Yeah, well, that's right. Our forefathers only lived about 25 years of age. We've got a lot of growing to do. So that, the rebellion is healthy in a way. But never forget, it is merely the other side of the coin of the problem. It's saying, I don't want to, be part of the problem anymore. But yet, as you saw in the 1960s, and as you still see, there's not too much solution stuff happening. They've got so far to realize it's a horrific, deathly system that's going on. And I mean, the symbolism of these people is already telling you who they and what they are. Because really, nothing's been hidden. Even the colors, the red and the blue, are the degrees of Freemasonry. I mean, as we know, I hope everyone in this room knows that this is a one-party creature. And I showed Michael Moore's picture earlier because, you see, he is a great exemplar, and there's plenty of them, of this faux opposition. The game is like this. If you don't create your own rival, you might have to come up against one that really does mean business. You don't want that. You don't want the real fighters. You don't want those who are going to come and try and take down your system, of which there's been a few people like that in history. So you invent and fund and pay and clothe your own guy. Case in point, Michael Moore was interviewed during the summer of 2004 and asked repeatedly by Charlie Rose what the real reasons, this is after Fahrenheit 9/11, it's all done, and millions of dollars have been thrown around. What was the real reasons for Bush's alarming aggressive tactics and why so many liberties and rights were being flagrantly disregarded? Moore answered back in the same manner every time he was asked the same question, and I believe he was asked about half a dozen times. And his answer was, I don't know. Immediately, I knew that he works for them. You don't know? Excuse me, you've just thrown millions of dollars around. You've given a 70% fact because we are angry. So we'll follow this guy thinking he's got a piece of the truth. And just like they show you in The Meaning of Life, Monty Python, come with me, come. The waiter is leading, remember? And they end up nowhere. Aren't they the false gurus? Come. I'm going to show you where I live. I got a mystery I'm going to show you. Leads them through all the streets and up and down and all around. And then what? To an empty bloody field. I don't know. Well, that is not good enough. For you to be on primetime television with all of that time? Guess what? Alex Jones knows. Anthony Hilder could find out. Jordan Maxwell managed it. The people of America are managing it, but you can't find out? You have nothing to say? Meaning you know the problem, but you don't know what it is? Brilliant. I say to hell with that. It's in our face what is wrong. What is wrong is it's a one-party system. And this dialectic, we need to become very familiar with how it's worked. Because behind the scenes, it's just one guy. It's like I discovered in Ireland, the Irish Republican Army. Yeah, they had to change their name to the Irish Republican Army because they were originally called the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which is a very different meaning. That's Freemasonic. I start finding out that the little dove of Sinn Féin is the dove of the Knights of Malta and the Knights of Cologne. I start finding out that the green ribbon that Sinn Féin, Jerry Adams guy wears, it looks like the AIDS ribbon. Oh my goodness, that goes to a group called the Green Ribbon Lodge. Green Ribbon Lodge? Which is an outgrowth of the ancient order of Hibernians? What are we talking about? First it was armies and revolution, and now it's secret societies? Who's this orange on one side, and the green on the other, and the white in the middle? Nobody talks about the white. Who are the white pure ones that control both sides of that conflict? I started to have questions. Well, you can create Judaism in opposition to Christianity by the same hand. You can, by the same hand, create Catholicism and then create its opposition, Protestantism. You can create communism and say it's opposed to capitalism. You can create Democrats and then say they're opposed to the Republicans. And I ask you this then, is the enemy really the problem? All generals know that the enemy is not your problem. The problem is the ones that are meant to be marching with you who haven't the faintest idea what's going on. Or they're fearful and undereducated about the fight. When a warrior is going to battle, if he sees fear and ambivalence in the eyes of his comrades, he knows that you're good as dead. Remember Braveheart? In this fight, that's what the problem is. It's the members of our own contingent who are out to lunch, who haven't got clear on what's happening, who are undereducated, misinformed, or fearful. Mikhail Bakunin, one of my great heroes, the father of anarchism, who rotted in Tsarist jails until his teeth rotted out, 18 years chained to a wall in pitch darkness. This is only one of the imprisonments that this man had to go through. And when he came out, within 5 minutes, he's again writing on humanity and down with these tyrants. No, all his life long would never stop fighting autocracy. Yet, this man from his own words says, I'll take 1,000 czars over one Karl Marx. That's informed. Yet, isn't Karl Marx meant to be a socialist on the same side as Bakunin? We're all one. Down with the king, down with the czar. Bakunin says, no, down with you. I know you who you are. He said, a herd of animals organized by compulsion and force and concerned only with material interests, ignoring the spiritual side of life. At his own time, that's what he said the revolutionaries are. And of course, don't we know that the hand that crushes the tyrant's head becomes a tyrant in his stead? The enemy is not your problem. And that's a big theme. Never forget that. The enemy, in fact, you know something? The enemy that we so-called think is so awful and terrible, we've been taken out years ago. They're very weak. That's why they're called a hidden elite. Of course they're hidden. They know if we knew about them, we would destroy them in 5 minutes. When America finally wakes up, it'll be like Gulliver. You remember Gulliver was held down by all those little people? Well, when Gulliver finally wakes up, he'll be able to dust these George Bushes off their shoulders and throw them into the ocean. Because these individuals themselves are not spiritually pure and clean and cannot rise up high to feel high. So their mentality is to push and artificially repress good people so they feel great. They're not actually doing anything to spiritually progress or mature, but they are doing a lot to hold you down, and that's how they get their feeling of greatness. The petty tyrant in your neighborhood does the same thing. The bully in school does the same thing. So we found no weapons of mass destruction. It's a myth in the mind of psychically pathological people. Al-Qaeda didn't exist. And the only time it ever even looked like it might have existed, it was funded by the same neocons from New York City. The only time any kind of Islamic extremism ever even looked like it was on the map, or jihadist motives, was when you guys were, not you guys, but the American government was funding it. Remember those old Rambo movies? There's the proof. With the Mujahideen and the extremists in the Taliban in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. When the Soviets were pulling out, remember? If you don't know this, when the Soviets were pulling out, one of the generals told America that you have a bigger problem on your hand than we. Thank you, you've destroyed us, you've won, we're leaving, but I'll just give you a case in point. We've observed something since we've been in Afghanistan. You're going to have a bigger problem down the line, 10 years from now, with these Islamic extremists. But America didn't listen because America's funding them. Now, when Bush finally gets his position as president, he's big behind the pro-Zionist evangelists that are all over the television and rising now. But wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? On paper, aren't the extreme right-wing Christian pro-Zionist evangelists meant to be the opposers of guess who? The extreme jihadist Islamics, on paper. But they're funded by the same force. The same neocons, the same Straussians from New York City are funding the same group. It's recent history, it's in your face. My goodness, we don't have to be looking to ancient conspiracies and Mikhail Bakunin. As your great G. Edward Griffin said, deliberately create problems and then offer only those solutions which result in the expansion of government. Create conditions so frightful at home and abroad that abandonment of personal liberties and national sovereignty will appear as a reasonable price for a return to domestic tranquility and world peace. The teacher speaks. So when you see this toxic religion, of course there's going to be a cop-out from the rebel. The rebel doesn't know what we're talking about, but he knows that something's wrong with daddy and all that BS. So he's going to cop out. Can't blame him. Let's run the video.
Troops surrounded Jerusalem and laid siege to it, and it produced massive starvation. Luke 21:20 says, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, flee and know that the desolation is about to happen. Historian Josephus tells the story of Roman soldiers going from house to house, killing the survivors of the siege, people who were too weak from starvation to defend themselves, and walked into the home of a mother who was eating her infant child. And even they backed out. Josephus says that 1.1 million Jewish people died right there. Jerusalem was demolished. The temple was torn down. Jesus saw it and he wept. Remember, on his way to Calvary, he saw the Jewish women weeping for him, and he said, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and weep for your children and your children's children. Why? Because he said then, blessed are the breasts that never gave suck. Message, blessed is the woman who has no child, because when the Romans get here, you're going to fight over that child for something to eat. 60 years after Titus came Hadrian, and the Roman legions once again attacked Jerusalem as 500,000 Jewish people were killed. Hadrian hated the Jews. He removed the name of Judea from all the maps. He said, I'm going to remove the name of the Jews from the world's mind. And he had every map purged of the word Judea, and he wrote in its place Palestine, after the ancient enemies of Israel, the Philistines, of whom Goliath of Gath was their champion. The Palestinians, who claimed that Israel is their land in the 21st century, never owned the land. They have no legitimate claim to the land. They have only the hatred of Hadrian, the Roman general, for the historical confusion about to whom the land belongs. I assure you that historical confusion is clarified in the Word of God. Jesus wept when he saw the Crusades in 1099, where 900 plus Jewish people were burned alive in the Jewish synagogue as the Crusaders marched under the sign of the cross and herded Jewish men, women, and children into the synagogue, set it on fire, and cremated them while they sang, Christ, we adore thee. There were 7 major Roman Catholic crusades in which the Jews were butchered from Europe to Jerusalem and from Jerusalem back to Europe. Jesus saw it and he wept. He wept when he saw the Spanish Inquisition, where the bones of dead men, the bones of dead Jews were dug up by the Inquisition of the Roman Church, put on trial. And when those dead people couldn't defend themselves, the church expropriated all of their wealth and put it in the church treasurer. He saw Hitler's Holocaust and the systematic murder of 6 million people, and he wept. He saw all of that. Jesus wept when he saw the Jews of the 21st century being forced out of their homes in Gaza to fulfill the political pipe dream of the roadmap to peace. Jesus wept when he saw the coming of the Antichrist in the near future, a false Messiah coming out of Europe, who will make a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. He will break it in 3.5 years. He will set his image up in the city of Jerusalem for the world to worship him. And anyone who will not worship him will be executed. Jesus saw that, and he wept. And that Antichrist is coming soon. But I want you to hear this. The tears of Jesus over the abuse of the Jewish people and Israel are about to stop. Why? Because the Lamb of God in the book of Matthew is about to come back as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. The rabbi who rode a donkey into the streets of Jerusalem and was crucified a week later is about to ride through the clouds of heaven on a white horse, followed by the armies which are in heaven, and on his head shall be a crown, King of kings and Lord of lords, and he's going to rule this earth for 1,000 years from the Temple Mount of his father King David in the city of Jerusalem, and he's going to rule the earth with a rod of iron. What does that mean? It means he's not going to ask the Supreme Court if it's all right to pray. He's not going to ask the ACLU if the 10 Commandments can stand. It will be ruled by the law of the living God without apology. Put your hands together and give him praise and glory in the house of God. The Nazarene that was dragged before Pilate and Herod will have kings and queens and presidents and prime ministers and senators and congressmen, the rich and the mighty and the powerful, line up and bow before him. For every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. It's going to happen in the city of Jerusalem. Quickly, the 7 signs of his coming. The first sign is the rebirth of Israel. Jesus told his disciples in Matthew 24:32, now learn a parable about the fig tree, which is Israel. When you see the branch begin to bloom again means that it was dead for a while. You will know that my coming is even at the door. Now, in the Bible, when you say that, that means his hand is on the doorknob. When the Romans crushed Jerusalem in 70 A.D., the diaspora began. The fig tree figuratively died. On May 15th, 1948, the fig tree was reborn in a day, as prophesied by Isaiah 66 and 8. The tree is blooming again. Israel is alive. Israel is alive. Israel is alive. The King of Glory is on his way. If you listen closely, you can hear the footsteps of Messiah shuffling through the clouds of heaven. Messiah is coming. Messiah is coming. Messiah is coming. And he will be King of kings and Lord of lords. Give him praise and glory in the house of God. The second sign of his coming is the birth of nuclear warfare. Before the birth of nuclear warfare...
Go ahead. This is a clip that exemplifies many things. I mean, some of the rhetoric that he's speaking about of white horses and crowns above the head and all of this stuff is very little to do with Christianity. Anyone who's been following my work in the cult of Aton will understand that even the terminology that's being used by these people is certainly not Christian in origin. And the Messiah that they're talking about coming is not a Christian understanding at all. More than that, he's standing on the red carpet. That alone is alarming enough for those who understand what that means. But what I really wanted to exemplify with this is, do you see the tone of belligerence and aggression? Do you understand, if you wanted a picture of the Animus, here it is. These evangelists, as all priests and potentates exemplify, is that Animus that we've been talking about. And the tonality, you don't even have to be a behaviorist or a psychoanalyst to understand that it is violence and aggression and belligerence that is behind this. But what? It's sweetened up and cloaked with religion and spirituality. But of course, it's none of those things. It's the beast in action. And they have an and potentates exemplify is that Animus that we've been talking about. And the tonality, you don't even have to be a behaviorist or a psychoanalyst to understand that it is violence and aggression and belligerence that is behind this. But what? It's sweetened up and cloaked with religion and spirituality. But of course, it's none of those things. It's the beast in action. And they have an agenda. When I watch people like this, these horrific types, it makes me think of what Konrad Lorenz was saying, that man is the missing link between apes and human beings. And as it says in Exodus, nobody's denying it. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. It's all Martian. But I'm reminded of Jeremiah chapter 5, 26. Among my people are wicked men who lie in wait. Among my people are wicked men who lie in wait, like men who snare birds and like those who set traps to catch men. Like cages full of birds, their houses are full of deceit. They have become rich and powerful and have grown fat and sleek. Their evil deeds have no limit, and that's no exaggeration. What these people do behind closed doors also is horrific. But they themselves are merely lieutenants of something higher, of more insidious hierarchs that work from behind the scenes. But again, I want to emphasize the disguised sadism of all of this. And anyway, most of religion is merely disguised sadism. Turn the other cheek, bless those who hurt you, martyrdom to the endless needs of others. What is all of that? That's not healthy. but you just put a little smoke screen on it. The image of the Christ that they're using, dying hideously, tortured on the cross, which they've just again ingratiated you with the Jesuit crony, Mel Gibson, pushing that image down your throat, because it's based on these complexes of consciousness and the sadism that is lurking in the limbic realms of all people. That's how they earn their daily bread. And that sadism is in evidence all around us. But you see, what we do is we act sadistically and say, but don't blame me. I was taking orders. Blame them. And then you go further up and it's go, no, but don't blame me. I received it from up there. What are you talking about? I'm not sadistic. Because as long as we are slaves to the master, we can always blame the master. The master goes, that's right, that's right. You're off the hook, you see. You have immunity because you have given me your allegiance. So you can go out there also and create horrors in my name, and I'll take the blame. And you know something? The ego is well happy to do that. So we have healthy and unhealthy forms of rebellion. But as any Aquarian will only be too happy to tell you, their sign and their planet Uranus is connected to rebellion. But then so must Pluto be, because Pluto is closely connected to Aquarius, you see? Now, this spirit of rebellion happens to have been quite conspicuous in the world since the discovery of the planet Pluto, has it not? You see, the Mikhail Bakunins and the other forms of rebellion and revolution and anarchy that you have in the world, they couldn't really exist too openly in the Victorian age. It's been since the discovery of Pluto that this has been moving in the world. You couldn't have a Woodstock, you see, and a hippie movement and all of these things. Those are all symptoms of a new paradigm. But the thing is that the kind of rebellion born from reaction will not avail true change. It is merely a temporary personal and social alleviation. In the movie, always jumps to my mind, Schizophrenia, there is the analysis, if I might say, beautiful treatment of the true spirit of rebellion. Where you have the person who is thinking that he's going to be unique because he's a mod. I don't want to be like everybody else. That's why I'm a mod, see? Then he wakes up to find out that, look, being a mod means that you have no identity. And this person finally works it all out and realizes he's not independent. And so in his personal drama, he breaks through the lie of identification, you see. In that movie, they show you the identification of the object of hate, and they also show the act of rebellion and the fiction of that, and how this person then incredibly passes through and discovers his own androgyny and his own mastery. A tremendous treatment of the positive side of rebellion by people who understood not to buy into all the lie. Because then you've got a mod, then you've got the rockers, you see? Right away, you've got the conflict again. And this person wakes up to see it and acknowledge it. But the rest of us, we're just happy with the rebellion. Because we never forget that Father also has our money bags in his hand. So we need a kind of a topical alleviation occasionally. Like things like the Burning Man Festival. They appear to be, the counterculture, but you'll find very, very few aware people there. Really, when it comes down to it. You'll find lots of rebels with a small r. But you will find very people who have a faintest idea of how to really change the system. As we said, there's a deep connection between Pluto and Uranus, Scorpio and Aquarius, and this act of rebellion, the spirit of rebellion, is coming in with Pluto. So if the astrological jargon is, hard to get your mind around, don't worry. Pluto represents an act of true holistic rebellion against all that is punitive and corrupt. But as we just saw in the video clip, that rides against the establishment. And it's an old story. Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, says nothing is more poisonous, harmful, or devilish than a man in rebellion. Christianity and these organizations, these organized religions, as well as the corporate dominance and governments, they're there to erase your spirit of rebellion. That's their modus operandi. That's why they exist. They don't exist to take you to God or to heaven. There's very few enlightened people in Christianity, if you haven't noticed. There's very few enlightened people anywhere in the world, including on the banks of the Ganges. But what there is conformity, violence, subservience to tradition, and untold sadism to the self and to others. And there is the obvious control and subjugation of the true spirit of rebellion. Aldous Huxley, and he should know because he was one of the people devising ways to keep people down, he said, "It is perfectly possible for a man to be out of prison and yet not free. To be under no physical constraint and yet to be psychologically captive, compelled to think, feel, and act as the representatives of the national state or of some private interest within the nation wants them to think, feel, and act. The nature of psychological compulsion is such that those who act under constraint remain under the impression that they are acting of their own initiative." And that's key. The victim of mind manipulation does not know that he is a victim. To him, the walls of his prison are invisible, and he believes himself to be free. That he is not free is only apparent to other people. His servitude is strictly objective. You see, anybody here has actually had to deal with psychotic people or schizophrenics or people? It's very difficult to tell those people that their thinking is deranged. They think they're perfectly normal. Partly, as I said, they've adjusted to reality as they see it, so they're not wholly to blame. But even in the worst chronic syndrome, you will find that you're wasting your time. You could roll out your soul like a red carpet, and they'll walk right on it. Because they are thinking you're the dummy. You're the dumbass. You got it wrong. Charles T. Tart called it consensus trance. In short, I would say if it's not in the media, then most people think it didn't happen. Because they don't know what's going on in the other state or whatever. And if you came and told them, they probably think you're a crank and wouldn't believe it. But you put it on CNN and it happened. And conversely, if it did not happen, but is in the media, we believe it happened. The moon landing, for instance. Guess what? It didn't happen. Now, Edward Bernays, a master of propaganda and control of the human race, said, if we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it. It's not free and enlighten the masses he's talking about. No. These guys don't want to do anything have anything to do with that. They're busy spending money to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it. As John D. Rockefeller said, people are yielding themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. Bernays went on to say, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power in our country. We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. We are dominated by a relatively small number of persons. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind and who harness social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Erich Fromm, in his Anatomy of Human Destructiveness, a book I wish everybody would read, the sick individual finds himself at home with all other similarly sick individuals. The whole culture is geared to this kind of pathology. The result is that the average individual does not experience the separateness and isolation the fully schizophrenic person feels. He feels at ease amongst those who suffer from the same deformation. In fact, it is the fully sane person who feels isolated in the insane society. And he may suffer so much from the incapacity to communicate that it is he who may become psychotic. And haven't we all experienced that? From the time we were born, I assume everyone in this room has experienced that. And I would also say this, that if you are sane enough to see the insanity, that's a damn good sign, because it means you're not insane. So as bad as it is to feel bad about the things that are happening, look at the bright side, you can see it. It's they live. When in group narcissism, says Erich Fromm, the object is not the individual, but the group to which he belongs. The assertion that my country or nation or religion is the most wonderful, the most cultural, the most powerful, the most peace-loving, does not sound crazy at all. On the contrary, it sounds like an expression of patriotism, faith, and loyalty. And of course, they help us by cutting it up very, very small for us. Since we have decided not to think for ourselves, and they're doing the thinking for us, they also go, look, we won't get into all the complications. So we will cut it up nice and small for baby to swallow. But a rational man will say, electing mass murderers to commission professional murderers to commit genocide in our name does not mean that we are innocent. David Rockefeller said in his address to the Trilateral Commission, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march forward to world government. But thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, you representatives of the people, for keeping quiet and taking our backhanders and doing as you were told. Thank you for serving us and not the people, because we would have been routed out long ago had you not kept silent. If you hadn't handed them the bread, the bread and circuses, and wearing what Paris Hilton is wearing today, and Geraldo and the whole other circus, the Jerry Springers and whatever, the whole lot of it, the whole lot of it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, because we could not have operated for 5 seconds without your help." In 2000, in his memoirs, David Rockefeller said, "For more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents, such as my encounter with Castro, to attack the Rockefeller family for inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe that we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interest of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that is the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it." They don't mind telling you. You see, this country has never been a democracy. It's always been an aristocracy. They just don't wear robes and ride down the middle of the street with silk slippers on and a big crown. Because if they did, we were sick of it, you see. When America got started, the people knew all that. They thought they were getting away from that. So they kept quiet for about 100 years. Now they're just letting you know. Now they're just saying, okay, we're all through being quiet. Of course, anybody with a brain cell knew that it was an oligarchy, a plutocracy. But most of the people thought, no, it's a democracy. Now they're just telling you, no, it's not. We are royal blood, and we're going to treat you with a contemptuous way. Because you don't tell us what to do. We tell you how it is. And as Jung himself said, one of the greatest intellects that ever graced this planet, Carl Gustav Jung said, the larger a society or confederacy, the greater the amalgamation of collective, remember, as opposed to independence, collective factors, which is typical of every large organization. The more aggravated the moral and spiritual degeneration of the individual. It's very simple. But you've been told. You've had glowing lights in this country who've warned you against it. Just don't give in. Find your selfhood. Be sovereign. Be strong. Be real. How can you solve the needs of another when you don't even know what your own needs are? How can you live as a slave to the needs and approval of others? Stand up. A person who came from the hells of hells, who saw the worst kind of tyranny in Russia. She said, if one values human life, one cannot value its destroyers. But wait a minute. We know that in a way we can. Haven't we just talked about Freud? And that, you see, there is a pleasure in this destruction. That people who claim to like life do get a kick out of destruction. They are able to do so. That is, the pathological person can. The combined military expenditures of all the world's governments in 1987 were so large that all of the social programs of the United Nations could be financed for 300 years. So don't worry about cleaning up the mess and why is the world... It's very simple to clean up the problems. You just get rid of the impediment that's stopping it. You don't dream up new ways of doing it. It's because there's an epidemic in our midst, a virus in our midst. There's a vulture at loose. Another 2 books I will mention from the great psychologist Arno Gruen. The Insanity of Normality and the Betrayal of the Self. The Fear of Autonomy in Men and Women. And then we have to address this incredible mechanism. In the beginning we said, how is this accomplished? How do they do it? How does the control of the mind, the governmenta, happen? Frank Herbert said, fear is the mind killer. Right from here, Los Angeles, the magician and occultist Manly Palmer Hall said, to repress rebellion is to maintain the status quo, a condition which binds the mortal creature in a state of intellectual or physical slavery. But it is impossible to chain man merely by slaving his body. The mind also must be held, and to accomplish this, fear is the accepted weapon. The common man must fear life, fear death, fear God, fear the devil, and fear most his overlords, the keepers of his destiny. It's the master-slave. And it begins from the moment that you enter school. The teacher is a slave of somebody else. He's going to treat you like a slave. The false teacher. And of course, not having any security within, that we're a jellyfish within, we're a miasma of mess, then again, in comes the boss, in comes Big Daddy. And they will restore order. Like it says right there. Novus ordo seclorum. There will be an order. But what kind of order will it be? It won't be an organic, natural order of discipline and passion you see in reality. No, it'll be the boot stamping in the face of humanity forever, as George Orwell said. We got George Bush fulfilling George Orwell's theories. George Bush Sr. said that if the American people had ever known the truth about what we Bushes have done to this nation, we would be chased down the streets and lynched. He said that straight in an interview in 1992. We have the quote. But that's right. They don't even mind you knowing that it was engineered. But they can engineer it anyway. Because it's not just the first one. Because they know that you're going to give up your rights for the security that they bring. You read it, or the world is now reading it politically. I don't give a damn about politics. I'm into psychology. I know what's behind all of that. It's not just done. This is just one more recent, example of what man has done century after century. What everyone is doing even in their most intimate relationships. This is just on a macro political level that's affecting and disaffecting America. But it's an old story psychologically. And the state becomes the sole guarantor of our self-preservation. That's basically what it is. And the symbolism alone is alarming because, you see, these guys know how to wear the devil's horns when it's needed. Because he's Animus, remember, right? But we got to realize they don't just work on archetypally, in one area. They are composite. They can put on different masks whenever it's needed. They can be the strong father Animus figure when they need to be. But they can also play a little bit of the Thanatos for you if that needs to be. And they can even play a little bit of, the devil role for you. But mostly it's Animus. Mars, Saturn, the sun, the solar god. But they play with archetypes. Just like, cream floats to the top in milk, well, in politics, scum is what rises to the top. As William S. Burroughs said, we must all face the fact that our leaders are certifiably insane. Or worse. And I think that last statement is very interesting, or worse, because that ties in with the book, my work in Atlantis. That, I know what worse means. It's not just a matter of simple insanity. We're dealing with off-world presences here. But the idea can be simply stated like this. Vultures and carrion crows, with no disrespect to those animals, don't normally, you find them with a serviette stuck down their neck, seeking their food in a Japanese tea garden, do you? The sewer rat will be found in a sewer. If you find a dead corpse, expect maggots. So when the psychopath is then promoted by us to their positions of authority, they don't feel comfortable stewing in their own mess. Their idea is to make the whole world ambiently like what they are inside. Immediately. We call it war, and chaos and all sorts of threats. No, they feel good about that. Just like you feel good in a beautiful, harmonious place. You've got to realize that these people feel irritated in that kind of situation. They're psychically deranged. These are psychological monsters. They just happen to be in control of the world. And therefore they will then make the world the sea of chaos that makes them feel real good. Because they're not like us. They're not like, maybe these are people who are, affiliated with the alien gene. The Course in Miracles explains it. Having projected his anger onto the world, he sees vengeance about to strike at him. His own attacks thus perceived as self-defense. Because that's the delusion that they buy themselves into. They're not attacking anybody. They're defending themselves. Haven't you seen it in so many movies? If you can convince yourself that somebody's attacking you, then you're justified, aren't you? In your own head. You don't care if you're impeached. You don't care if the whole country throws you out. You're justified even if you end up sleeping on a beach under a bridge. If you put these people there, they're still going to have you the story. They're going to tell you about how they were hard done by. Well, don't we all do the same thing? When we're working for the system and the corporation, when we're given the executive badge, it's a wonderful company. As soon as they give us the sack, then we sit at the bar telling all our mates how horrible it was and how they mistreated us. Then, as psychotic as these people are, and this is what really gets me, you see, as psychotic and outrageous and maniacal and murderous as these people are, then they turn to you and go, let's not tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Like, these are paragons of reason. These are the saintly ones who are going to tell you, don't think. Don't step back from the canvas and use your own reason. For goodness sake, we don't tolerate any of that. You believe what we tell you. Never forget, your slave, me master. The psychotic is telling you, don't use your brain. How psychotic are you when then you do take that advice? Cortez said, mankind has always believed in three things with unconquerable faith. That the effusion of blood is necessary. That there is a manner of shedding blood which is purifying. Very important. And another mode which is condemnatory. History clearly attests these truths. It presents to us the narrative of cruel acts of bloody conquests, until the earth appears to us like an immense sea of blood, which neither the piercing breath of the winds can dry up, nor the scorching rays of the sun can absorb. There are such people in the world. So they want to create the schizogenic society, because they are schizophrenic. And the society that they mold and create, we live in, is of their temperament. They're like the fish that can choose, you see, the saline type of water that it's in. 2 million telephone conversations a year are now intercepted by law enforcement. Used to be called peacekeepers. Where's that word gone? Now it's law enforcement, buddy. Between 1990 and 1996, the number of workers under electronic surveillance increased from 8 million to 30 million. Simultaneously, employees eavesdropped on an estimated 400 million telephone conversations a year without government telling you to do it. They just started to do it on their own. Something like 750 calls a minute. That's right. And of course, it's the paranoid society. This way. We're always a fear of something. The warnings on the daily news. It's credit card fraud. It's sexually transmitted diseases. No, it's online safety for our kids. They're being seduced. And yet, even though there's a nationwide federal database for lost knives and forks, there isn't one for abducted children. Maybe we need to find out why. No, it's internet spying. It's genetic implants. It's illegal searches. No, it's insecure borders or terror attacks. And some of these may, in fact, be semi-legitimate. But taken together, they have an effect. They're like a poison. No, it's the greenhouse effect. It's melting bloody icebergs. It's war and rumors of wars. Well, now it's bird flu and whatever is going to come next. I mean, forever. This designer chaos is manufactured. It is the great and endless burlesque, funded from London and Vatican City, courtesy of the Queen. Except their little burlesque and stage play is in real time. It's a snuff film that's global. And they're sitting there loving it, just loving it. When on the news you see all that horror, because they know what it's doing. It's designed to chip away and erode at one's inner security. Because they knew if they came to you openly, to get what they wanted, you wouldn't vote them in. And even if they operate too openly, you wouldn't allow it. But if they can create a steady diet to make you so pathologically afraid, and it's easy to do, we are limbic creatures after all, then we will just fall apart, and we'll be leaking all this negative emotion, and negative fear, and paranoia. And then we'll go, yes, Lucifer, come in and help us, as Albert Pike said would happen. Come in and tuck us up in bed. So when you find yourself in this utterly crazy place, this war on terror, let's understand why. It's by design. In fact, you know something? If you're really symbolically literate, whenever this term war on terror, which I might add as a psychological term, it's not saying terrorism, which is political, or terrorists. It says war on terror. Now, terror is a psychological term. It's an inner state. Cold war, nuclear war, atomic war. Think about what those words really mean. They've got very little to do with external things. Atomic war, genetic war, Cold War, now war on terror. And you know how the right brain hears it? It's not war on terror, but war on terra. Terra. War on earth. Because it is a war on earth. And it's old. It's been in the making a long time. But the experts, the scientists know that when you're faced with a life-threatening situation, the reptilian hindbrain, the most primitive part of the human brain, switches off all activity, except that which keeps us alive. It sends the subconscious message, don't move, don't breathe, don't blink, or you'll be seen and attacked. You see? And that's what we do. We switch off. We're in a traumatized situation. Now, of course, we might make the mistake of looking to our little domestic syndromes for the reason for this massive stress. And we often don't really find the answer there. We may do even some cleansing and local homework, and yet it's like normal to be stressed. We don't realize we're like in a culture of stress, like a petri dish. As we said, R.D. Laing said that your insanity, your pathological situation, your stress or whatever, hypertension, this is a perfectly natural adjustment to a totally unnatural and negative environment. So you can keep on researching your little domestic thing and your little relationship problems. Guess what? That may account for a very small fraction of the real reason why you're in the state that you're in, as a matter of fact. So some people finally start to realize or get a grip on this, what I'm talking about. And you might phrase it like some people say, have I been sold a lie? Becomes a mantra. Because I think something's up here. I don't like what I see. I'm not going to wear a tie-dye and become a hippie, but I'm sure that something's off here. Have I been sold a lie? But the smarter person, the one who's really going to affect change in this world, says the same thing but in a different way. He says, have I bought a lie? Because somebody can sell you something, but you don't have to buy it. When you understand that you've bought into it, that these people have no power at all, they do have control, but you have the power. You give it away. Then you affect change. One is a road to nowhere, and the other one is a road to salvation. So what is the great change? The Pluto's approach and the countdown to 2012. What's going to happen? Can we get maybe even a broad theme, a broad pastiche of what that might be? Well, man runs away from his own shadow self and has a sadistic relationship with himself and with his darker emotions, quote unquote. But, like biological white blood cells, ladies and gentlemen, these darker emotions exist to signal that something is wrong within the body politic and to let us know that we are under attack, either from ourselves or from some other external source. But where are our altars to these dark guardians? You see, your anger, your stress, your hypertension, your fear, right? All of that. These are aspects of ourselves. We've been conditioned to believe and observe them negatively. So we're in inner conflict. Because now you've got a lower part of yourself and a higher part of yourself. You're inwardly divided. Then how are you going to fix external division? Pluto will bring in will call for a new relationship with what are laughingly called our darker aspects of ourself. They're only darker because one part of us is so super lit that everything else of our being is cast into darkness. The shadows we fear are cast by our own hand, our own minds. Now, you see, the problem is, though, that it's like, imagine your mind is like the court of the king. You don't like it when these hideous, ragged, evil-smelling, foul-looking, wrinkled old guardians come in to tell the story of what they've seen on their travels. No, we want Don Juan and white horses and perfumery and wonderful tales of high adventure. So when these strange people come into our court and try to tell us in their croaking voices an amazing story of where they've been and what they've seen, we go, get away, anger, get away, violence, get away, all of that. And we're told not to listen to these beings. So we have an inner conflict at hand. But these are aspects of ourselves that have an amazing story to tell us about the world and about reality. We better start listening to what these guardians are saying. So we must come into a new kind of relationship with the so-called dark guardians, that part of ourselves that we do not heed. And we've been taught to censor ourselves to a pathological degree and are suffering immensely as a result. You can't live in a one-season world. You can try, but sooner or later the winter will come. And it will come too hard and then you'll be perished because you're not acclimatized to it. But this does not mean, I'm not saying that now we become all perverse and criminal. It merely means that we develop our ego maturity to heed those voices that tell us what violates our inner body politic. Your white blood cells, you couldn't live without them. When a disease or something attacks your system, they come to your help. Well, these dark guardians, especially anger, has a blue flame of anger. Watch the movie Hellboy. Because that movie will teach you something about the blue flame of anger. It's a defense mechanism. Yes, if you don't integrate it, it'll become pathological and you'll find its muddy boot prints around and it won't be very pleasant. You'll be thinking, what's that smell? And look at all this mess. Yeah, because you haven't welcomed them in and cleaned them off and listened to what he has had to say under all that dust. But they're knocking to get in, going, the house is burning. Open up, let me tell you about it. You go, oh, get away, you. I call the police, get out. The state that is achieved when we cease being sadistic and punitive with ourselves, when we desist seeking the approval of others, when we free ourselves and others from the tyranny of our dependency. There are also factors involved here in the listening to these incredible parts of us. I'll just say, as controversial as it is, and the psychologists actually should have taught you this a long time ago. And the New Age movement, that's defunct in my opinion as well. Because they have not said what I'm going to say now. And that is, you can get out of your mind any idea that anger and hate and violence have ever caused any problems on this earth. Except when they, as I said, become pathological. But actually, we better wake up and realize that not hate, not anger, not violence has ever caused any of them problems that are on this earth at all. And anyone who believes that has got a very, very limited understanding of the world that they're living in. The problems are caused in this world, ladies and gentlemen, not by those things, but by false love. Now, of course, we don't even have that. Deal with your dark content. We barely have the time to do the laundry. We barely have time to catch some sleep or take care of our kids, which is by design. That's stress again. In fact, the 4 best-selling drugs in the nation today are for stress-related health problems: ulcer medications, hypertension treatments, tranquilizers and sleeping pills, and antidepressants. As a nation, we spend an astonishing $650 million per year on sleeping pills alone. 4 million Americans abuse prescription drugs and are addicted to tranquilizers, stimulants, and painkillers. When I first visited this country, I knew something was wrong because when you turn on commercial television, I'm watching advertisements for the most contaminated foodstuffs that you could possibly imagine, and the next commercial is about the medical, getting something to fix it. Some poison. I went, what is wrong with this picture? It's okay to vaccinate yourself and eat contaminated foods that a dog wouldn't eat. Because why? Well, we got a doctor that's going to fix it. Now, many of us sense that something is missing from our lives, and that in our hectic existence, focused on getting pleasure and spending, on having more and achieving more, all these acquisitive drives, we've come to neglect our emotional well-being. Now, Pluto comes in to change that. Pluto is not about acquisition or some kind of attainment in the masculine or yang way that we're so used to. Now, Freud said something very interesting about the ego also. It has to do with our parents. He said that the ego contains or embodies the permissive and prohibitive nature of our parents. And this happens even if you only have a one-parent family. The parent allows you to do certain things and then prohibits you from doing something else. This action on your life creates your conscience because you embody it. And then you know what is right and what is wrong. It's called conscience. It's a word invented by Freud. He called it also the ego ideal or the superego. And the superego is split between the prohibitive and the permissive drives. You all have it. Now, the ego can over-identify with either complex, right? The rebel, as we saw, the hippie, is identifying with the permissive aspects of his consciousness. Nothing wrong with that. But the disciplinarian, the slave of the servant of the Saturnian energy, is overcompensating. He's over-identifying with the punitive or prohibitive aspects. Now, isn't it interesting that if you take it down a notch and come to the political manifestation of what I've just said, you find it that politicians use this Freudian schemata. And we call it conservatism and liberalism. Again, a faux opposition created for you. But it's necrotic and biotic. It's Thanatos and Eros played out in the political milieu. Now, one of the other problems why what I'm talking about is often not, dawned on a lot of people is because, you see, cruelty to others is, in fact, well documented, obviously. Right? The Hunt for Serial Killers, all the movies about it, the Quest for Justice, all the programs. And, of course, in physical cruelty, when somebody's beating somebody up or murdering, you can call physical police and you can go to court and you can get physical, in-your-face justice about it. But when it's Cruelty to the self, who's going to notice? When it's sadism to the self. But my God, cruelty to the self? If you identify with the Father and the prohibitive aspects overly, then you are a walking criminal to yourself. And I am myself personally, you see, not concerned very much with the utter form of crime. I think it's interesting to study. The study will go on, and it's been recognized. We all recognize it. I am infinitely more interested in the unseen form of cruelty that each person does to their own selves, and that must be studied. If you've embodied it because your parents have been rotten, that's probably where it might originate. And they learned it from their parents and so on. But it must stop. For instance, the mystical, remember we were talking about the healthy yogas of the ancient world where they were trying to, condition out the alien gene. Now today when you feel you're not still enough, you don't have any peace, they even sell you that. So now you're thinking some guru on a bed of nails somewhere, some exploiter, another predator, is going to teach you what you need to do. Because you don't feel that you can control your mind or you'll be still enough. You know all that kind of yoga? It's nothing more than sadism to the self. It's another, I'm not good enough, need to get to God, tell me what to do. And I impose another authority on me. I impose another system or technique. Perhaps one could say that the only healthy form of yoga is the hatha yoga, which is just physical exercises to keep the body kind of healthy. Okay, I can accept that one. But see, most of the other ones, it's nothing but the same old sadism we've been talking about under another name. And this sadism and necrophilia, the true meaning of the word necrophilia is connected to sadism. It's love of death. It's the thanatos. So when you're not integrating your shadow and you're buying into all this lie that we've been describing, you are basically a lover of the dead. You gain, just like when you peel a scab, you have that sort of morbid, pleasure from peeling a scab. Magnify that many, many, many times. Now there's healthy aspects of that as well. When you see the bully in the school who's pulling the pigtails of the little girl, but the teacher's been observing and then comes and gives him a whack, you get a sort of a perverse pleasure out of that, don't you? So we all have it, but in the psychotic people it's very, very enlarged. That whole feeling that they get a deep and abiding pleasure because they have murdered their own selfhood. The person who has murdered their own femininity or masculinity or who have murdered their own selfhood, well, how do you think they're going to operate outside? How do you think they're going to relate to everyone else? They may have the persona so that they appear to be normal, but the person who has murdered themselves in their life cannot be expected to exist rationally. As I said, if the ego is the ghost that has arisen from the grave of the self, then expect it to act in ghoulish ways. If you leave rotten meat out, expect maggots. Don't blame the maggots. So if you see a body politic, you see, that is rotten in this way, that's why. Because the ego is ruling and the self is dead. The executives are out on holiday. So the office manager has become the king. He's a maniac. He's running around telling everybody what to do. Yes, he opens and locks the doors. He washes the floor. He's very official and he gets a lot of things done. So, in fact, technically speaking, the corporation is standing. But it's a very punitive place and you don't want to work there. He's trying to save on light bills. He's bossing everybody around. So the executives have not come in. Spirit is not there. Selfhood is not there. Selfhood has been murdered. And in its place we have something else. And from that we get masochism. Masochism is nothing but sadism to the self. It's just a fancy word for sadism towards oneself. And out of that comes horrors. Your narcissism, your obesity, your bulimia, the body piercing, the drug addiction, the alcoholism. All of this is coming out of a deep and intense violence towards oneself that must end if there's ever to be change in the world. And you must develop the science of observing it, not in others, but in yourself. How do you censor yourself? From that comes the sadism that we're familiar with. The war, the rape, the murder, the misogyny, the megadeath. All of that is a mere external version of something inside. And then it extends even from that point out to nature and to animals. But it's all rooted inside oneself. And what's the cocktail? Obesity, anorexia, insomnia, hypertension, obsession with appearance. My God, you don't have to turn on the television. Obsession with appearance and cosmetic appearance. And then the fitness mania, which is nothing more than another form of sadism. Hard-bodied, as Wilhelm Reich would have easily shown us. And do you notice the mechanicalistic, monotonous repetition of the way that they even present exercise? It's not done in a very yin or organic way. Even the exercise machines that they show you are demonic. And the message that they're sending you about what you think health is meant to be. Routine, mechanical, movements of the body, totally anti-organic and anti-feminine. And there's so many of those. Why? Because they're selling you a message. And the depression and the ADD and the delinquency and the addiction. And look what's buried in the middle of all of that. The chronic dependency, the key. You can't be anything unless somebody else has given you approval. And mostly you don't get the approval, so as the psychologists well know, look what then happens to us when we don't get it. Look what then becomes of us and what we start doing when we don't have that approval from somebody. Look what we turn ourselves into. Now, anxiety is an interesting word. It's used a lot. It's different than fear. Anxiety comes from the German word Angst. But the psychologists in Germany were saying, look, fear is the word that means when you're being attacked from outside. It's the emotion that you feel when there's a legitimate physical attack. Angst is very different. Angst is from within, when there's something about yourself that's in disorder or malaise. That needs to be borne in mind. What we're having today when we're talking about anxiety disorders is all rooted in what I've been talking about. And then we have the cures, because of course we're not doing the healthy work to solve the problem. No. As I said, we poison ourselves with toxic foodstuffs full of contaminants and then seek respite for our terrible inner discomfort on a physical level from a leviathan that administers nothing more than further poisons to us in the name of our health. Isn't that a symptom of our psychosis? But we want that, because what's it all really based on? The doctor's another daddy. Are you feeling better now, darling? Oh, yes, doctor. You're feeling like hell, but don't irritate the doctor. Roll up the sleeve. They could tell you to do somersaults and bend over backwards and people will do it. Because that animus figure is very important. But a priest, pope, politician, doctor, tutor, you see, the whole 9 yards. The expert. Look, we're in submission to the expert. Everyone else is more powerful and more knowledgeable. And we've given our power away to the worst kind of sadists. As we said, we not only go to the medications for the alleviation of the problem, but we often do try Eastern mysticism and various other things, and it's good to study and, try them. But we must never forget that the true yoga is something very different. It is, as Pluto will be describing and showing to people, the cleansing of the psyche. It's psychic immunity. It's psychic cleansing and hygiene. It's sanity. So now we come up to this question, that now we've established that there's something, first of all, we've established there's deep connections between what's happening in the world politically and what's happening in the inner republic. We discover that the Mayans, in their descriptions, were talking about the last 13-year countdown to the 0 year of 2012, and they described it as an age of revealing when the masks would be coming down. The Bible corroborates that, and they have talking about their apocalypse. But the apocalypse comes from the word, from the Greek, to reveal. In fact, what they really meant was, the apocalypse was a physical thing. Apocalypse was a big leather covering that covered something. That's all it meant. A leather covering. A leather covering. What's the metaphor? Yeah. Your body. The leather covering of the skin of the human being. That's what the apocalypse... And that's why they said the Battle of Armageddon will be fought in the air, meaning it's not physical. It's an intellectual battle. Anyone who's done a little study of the metaphorical, symbolic stuff knows this. We've established that there are these great connections between the microcosm and the macrocosm. And now, fortunately, it's not just the mystics, the true yogis. It's not just the Wilhelm Reichs and the occultists who've been talking about this. At last, finally, the scientists are also are catching up. Dr. George W. Crowell of the Cleveland Laboratories announced that he had discovered at the heart of every living organism a tiny nucleus of energy all aglow, with temperatures ranging from 3,000 to 6,000 degrees of heat, which he called radiogens or hot points, precisely akin to the radiant energy of solar matter. Look at that. Precisely akin to the radiant energy of solar matter. He affirmed that a tiny particle of the sun's power and radiance was lodged within the heart of every organic unit. If a mystic had said it, they go, he's crazy, he's on something. But a scientist is now saying it. Deepak Chopra addresses it. Photons, which is the highest form of physical light, come out of nowhere. They cannot be stored, they can barely be pinned down in time. And they have no home in space whatsoever. That is, light occupies no volume and has no mass. The similarity between a thought and a photon is very deep. Both are born in the region beyond space and time where nature controls all processes in that void which is full of creative intelligence. Well, in the early 1980s, thanks to the development of a sophisticated measurement device, a team of scientists demonstrated that the cells of all living beings emit photons of a rate up to approximately 100 units per second per square centimeter of surface area. They also showed that DNA was the source of the photon emission. The Mayan calendar, says Stephen Hanor, is the only calendar known to be based on galactic cycles. The Mayans claimed that they created this calendar in order to monitor the light coming from the center of the galaxy and how it affected our DNA. We now know, through the work of Fritz Popp, that DNA not only absorbs light, but also emits light. DNA also appears to be the bridge between our physical and etheric bodies. Modern science now realizes that our DNA directly reflects our consciousness, making it possible for us to willfully change our DNA. Now that's magic, and that's true religion. Of course, the slave wants nothing to do with that. He's given away his power to others who do the thinking for him. Consciousness changed my DNA? You mean disease is changeable by consciousness? I don't want to believe that. It's external, it's a bug, it's a virus that's outside of me. I don't want to have anything to do with consciousness. I don't want to think. I don't want to change my consciousness. No. I believe what the FDA and the AMA tell me. But as a matter of fact, the opposite is true. The whole of matter can be transformed and changed by thinking. So when you see these stupid Lego sets that they show you the DNA tree floating in this hyperspace, that's malarkey. That's Hollywood, that's TV. No. The DNA is nothing but an expression of vibration, of energy, affected by thought. It's below thought. Your thinking will transform it. But my goodness, what would this philosophy now would do to the human race? There is a harmonic relationship between the Earth and our mind-body. Earth's low-frequency isoelectric field, the magnetic field of the Earth, and the isostatic field that emerges from our bodies are closely interwoven. Look, the scientists are saying this now. Our internal rhythms interact with external rhythms, affecting our balance, our REM patterns, and our mental focus. For epochs, the Schumann's resonance has provided the orchestrating pulse for life on this planet, our planetary heartbeat, which sets the tempo for health and well-being. ELF waves, frequencies of Schumann's resonance, are intimately linked with those of human brain waves. Natural or artificially induced changes in the Schumann resonance could affect the subtle and perhaps gross brain wave generation. So they're saying that, changes in the Schumann resonance can affect your brain. Liquid crystals, DNA, brain ventricles, and cellular structure, and by the way, DNA, as I've just said, is not as they're showing you. Now, these liquid crystals in the human body may operate as antenna for detecting and decoding such global and local ELF signals. But I say something else. Could it be the other way around? Are the mental, emotional, and psychological states of human beings causing the changes to the electromagnetism of the planet? Well, Wilhelm Reich would certainly agree. And we need to get into this, because we got it all back to front. Of course, a physical event takes place, like now they're burning with heat in New York City because the power's off. So they say, my emotional states are caused by this horrific thing that the government is doing. Damn them, I'm out of my mood. How many people think, what was going on in the collective consciousness that caused that outbreak? That set this mood? We don't think like that. It's very foreign to us. Well, of course it's foreign to us. The people who try to teach us, like Wilhelm Reich, we lock those guys up in federal stockades and have them killed. That's why we are unfamiliar with most of this stuff. So changes within the mental reactions of humans, whether induced artificially or not, may precipitate the so-called earth changes that everyone's talking about. So what am I saying? That your mind, your thinking, and the thinking of the collective is actually affecting the world that we know outside ourselves, not the other way around? Well, the collapse of the Earth's magnetic field, which both guards the planet and guides many of its creatures, appears to have started in earnest about 150 years ago, the New York Times is planning to report. Science reporter Bill Broad has filed a report which explores how the Earth's field strength, the field strength, has waned 10% to 15% so far, and this deterioration has accelerated of late. increasing debate over whether it portends a reversal of the lines of magnetic force that normally envelop the Earth. So something bizarre is off. And of course, the scientists will always be looking for external causes. Broad goes on to claim a reversal could knock out power grids, hurt astronauts and satellites, widen atmospheric ozone holes, send polar auroras flashing to the equator, and confuse birds, fish, and migratory animals that rely upon the steadiness of the magnetic fields as a navigation aid. Remember all those beached whales and beached porpoises? They're happening all over the world. It's almost pandemic. Nature's telling us something. And then there is this other concept that ties into this. The Earth grid problem. The Earth grid, there's a dodecahedron of energy lines around the Earth. They're often called the dragon paths or the ley lines, axiational lines, but they're more correctly called synchronic lines. And the establishment big boys know about them. But just like a human body has capillaries, veins, and arteries, so does the Earth. And they're living. Gaia's body is living. And like most systems, there's a reciprocal relationship at work. And that grid is very much connected to unconsciousness. To, ego consciousness too little, but you can bet that the grid, the matrix, is very much in allegiance and connected. There's a deep umbilical rapport with our own minds and consciousness. As I said, the elites know about these paths, and they build a lot of their own establishments. Their state buildings and their military establishments and other buildings. They empower, like in London. Anytime you go to London or any of these famous cities and look at these incredible houses of parliament and all, they're put on specific areas of the earth in order to empower the people that are there, so they don't get bombed or assassinated and whatever. However, you can be living in a totally geopathic place. They don't mind that. But the great cities of the world, this is a whole other piece I deal with in the DVDs. But I'm bringing it up now because we've been talking about pathology and the toxicity that's in people. Well, guess what? It's going to increase because there's something we have to know about the Earth grid. The Earth grid is also partly a flushing system for human toxicity. As the human toxicity that's generated from our minds, our subconscious minds, is increasing and increasing and increasing, it's like backed up sewers. The Earth grid partly acts as a sewer for human consciousness. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It's getting massively backed up. And when the system starts backing up, it floods back up into you. There's a backup taking place in the system, in the signal. And therefore, the normal, maybe psychosis that some people have is going to now be exacerbated massively by the backup of the old stuff that was there. Causing what? Yeah. Causing Quatermass 5, creating the worst horrors that you're going to... Creating actually basically what you can see when you walk down any street today. If you're psychic, I've been seeing it for a long, long time in the eyes of people. I'll tell you right honestly. Because you're going to be seeing it yourselves very soon. But there is something not right in people's eyes and in their behavior and their mannerisms of late, if you haven't noticed it already. So we finalize with this understanding of something immense and incredible. The gentleman was asking me an incredible question earlier about what is spirit. Talk about ego, talk about the complexes, talk about the tripartite division of the human mind based on Freud and so on, and religion and its abuse. But what is really spirit? And what is the Holy Spirit that they've put before us? And I, in my work, always connect this with Shiva and with Pluto and then with the material we've been talking about. And it's easy to do. It's not very complicated or mystical or mysterious. Why Shiva would be connected to the Holy Spirit? Because Shiva is the third part of the Trimurti, or the Hindu Trinity. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Brahma the creator, Vishnu the sustainer, and Shiva the destroyer. Remember we're talking about civilizations that are born, they rise to their peak, and then they decay. But in the Christian Trinity, which is borrowed from all of these Oriental peoples, by the way, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, ergo Shiva, is equated with whatever the Holy Spirit is. It is connected to whatever Shiva is. Period. But Shiva is one of the oldest gods known to man. In fact, when the anthropologists were going around the world looking for the oldest people, and that's both Celtic, the Irish is the oldest civilization on the planet. But even when they went to India and to the depths of the Dravidian people and said, "Hey, you guys believe in God?" They go, "Yeah, we believe in God." And the anthropologists asked to see images of God. So have you got any iconographs of God? And whenever anything was brought out, it was always a God with horns on its head, sitting in an asana. That's a yoga pose. With horns on its head, surrounded by forest animals. And they said, Shiva. Shiva was the father of humanity. And in Celtic mythology, it's Herne the hunter, or Cernunnos, or Cernunnos. But here is the great revelation. In this tripartite concept of God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we sense something that is a lie. And that something, the time has come for the revelation of what that lie is about. God, we have pretty much a clear understanding of what that is. Jesus, the Christ, or the Son, or the solar king, or the agent, the minister, okay, the comforter, the presence that's sort of humanoid. We kind of got a fix on that. But they always put before us the ambivalence of the famous Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost they even call it. And they symbolize it by the dove. It's very vague. Some traditions connected with Sophia, with Mother Mary. But again, very vague. They want to scale back the whole feminine concept totally. But now we can understand, in my work I emphasize this, that the Holy Spirit, that third part of the Trinity, is nothing more than you. Is the self. The Holy Spirit of the Trinity equals, ladies and gentlemen, the self. That is you. If you're in selfhood, by the way, that's the footnote. If you're in egohood, well then it doesn't apply. Or it only applies a little bit. But the person who's in selfhood, because we can see, and I call it the magical Trinity. The magical Trinity is the universal intelligence, which Christians have called God. The men and women are the sons of God. That's us. But that is pretty much a useless circuit if you don't have the final component, which is the person themselves. What good is it if you don't have the self at the as part of this, as the recipient of all of that? So I'm here to tell you that that's what that is. And that's why we don't have selfhood. And that's why we have every kind of conceivable agency in this world operating to make sure that you're neither independent nor in a state of selfhood. Now look again at these books that were cast out of the Bible. Why that might have happened. Because in the Gospel of Thomas, the teacher, Jesus, is saying, he who blasphemes against the Father, and this is known to Christians, but he says, he who blasphemes against the Father will be forgiven, and he who blasphemes against the Son will also be forgiven. But he who blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either on earth or in heaven. This is a well-known statement to Christians. And then they're shivering in fear going, okay, it's a sin. It's a certain kind of sin. If I sin, I'll be forgiven by God and I'll be forgiven by the Son of God, Jesus. But what the hell is this Holy Spirit bit? And they leave you hanging. Well, it's nothing more than sinning against yourself in exactly the ways that I've been describing. A violation to the Holy Spirit, how can it be forgiven by any other agency when you're doing it to your own selfhood? There is no greater crime. Because you're out of touch with God. If you have no selfhood, forget even being in touch with God. And the Son, forget it. These are just expressions of something. You have to be a self, don't you, to even have a relationship with anything. If you're an ego, you're a fractured being, like I've been describing. The ghost is nothing more than the ego is nothing more than the ghost that has arisen from the grave of the self. But it's been there before us all along. Origen, the church fathers even used to say it in the 3rd century AD. You yourself are even another little world and have within you the sun, the moon, and also the stars. In Corinthians it says, you are the temple of God, for the temple of God is holy, which temple you are. Acts in the New Testament, the Most High dwells not in temples made with hands. And from the Gospel of from John, the words of Jesus himself, the works I do, you can do, and greater. The teacher is telling you, hey, what I do is pretty cool, huh? You can beat it. You can do even more than that. How come we weren't taught this in Sunday school? How come our parents are not telling us that we're Christ's walking on the earth? Gospel of Thomas. This is heavy, so profound. This is religion. When you know yourselves, and then you will be known. And you will know that you are the sons of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you are in poverty, and you are poverty. Did not the Vedics say self-realization is required before God-realization? Did not the motto at the Oracle of Delphi said, know thyself? Every agency that exists in this world that is evil stands against that knowledge of the self. And stands against the agency of the Holy Spirit. But let me tell you that it's not just some astrological anecdote from some fringe astrological pundit when we know that the planet Pluto is coming towards galactic center, because as I've been describing, that is the representative of the Holy Spirit actually coming into this planet. Oh, it's on its way. Not perhaps as a Christian would understand it, granted. But I don't care about that. It is a fact. And this Pluto is connected to the spirit of rebellion, to Aquarius and to Uranus. But it is also something much more than that. It is literally the Holy Spirit that they've been talking about, entering into the world and into the hearts and minds of men. They've been telling us for a long, long time. Now the Spirit was the original, the Self was the original Holy Spirit. The return to Self means the end of dependency of all kinds. Now that you know this, you can see that the selfless person, or the ego-based person, is in big trouble. Because Pluto, as Robert Hahn said, isn't particularly subtle. When it comes in to check the pulse and the immunity, you better be on the ball. Because it's likely to go dissolution. Shiva is the god of dissolvement. Now the marriage with oneself is always and necessarily followed by a reciprocal divorce from all that is not the self. This is very important. In the mystical tradition, in astrology, and particularly alchemy, and in many New Age books, you'll always hear them rattle on about the famous chemical wedding. And it's all beautiful poesy is written and wonderful anecdotes about this mysterious chemical wedding. Anyone who's a real occultist or magician or teacher will tell you that actually before you can ever even approach this strange nucleated state or join the feminine and the masculine together and the higher man and the lower man, before you can come to that state, you must first participate in a chemical divorce. See, it's the opposite of what we have on life. First we marry, then we divorce. Mystically, it's a reverse. Divorce from what? From all that is wrong, all that is false, all that is corrupt. Until you end in your life all the things that are not true, you can forget about any type of enlightenment. This is a catabolic action, and Pluto is going to be the teacher of that. It's not going to be an acquisitive I want. Like the rich man says he wants a Mercedes, the spiritual man says I want God. But it's all born out of the same need and feeling of emptiness. No, it's not going to come that way. This is a yin action, not a yang action. You don't get it in the same way that you acquire. It's not a product of the acquisitive, egoistic mind that wants the whole world to fill its emptiness. Now, of course, this return to selfhood and the division, right, the divorce from all that is false, is very painful and traumatic to the ego of man, because the ego is well happy with all of that. The ego has made its home here, and now you're telling it to burn down its shack. Because look, I just built this thing. And therefore, hence, as I've been saying, the avoidance and the gimmicks and the denial and the projection and everything else that we're involved with. But as Friedrich Nietzsche said, the individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will often be lonely. And you will sometimes even be frightened. But no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. The magician from the 19th century, Aleister Crowley, he puts it this way, talking in incredible language. Anyone who is forced from his own course, either through not understanding himself or through external imposition, comes into conflict with the order of the universe and suffers accordingly. So if there's stress and suffering in your life, there's a reason. As I said, those are red flags. Those are guardians coming and knocking on your door saying, hey, part of the building is crumbling. Things are off. Your suffering is your guide. Your fear, your tension, your nightmares, you can't drug it out of existence. You can't medicate it. Well, you can. But it's, that's destruction. That's annihilation, is what you're basically doing. And more so, you're producing leviathans who prey upon you by doing that. When you accept that you can do something about it, and you see this, whenever suffering or anger or pain enters into your life, you listen to it. You let it wash over you. In the movie Dune, they talk about this from the books of Frank Herbert. There's many other movies and other art forms that talk about this, that explain this concept that I'm talking about. And once upon a time, it was the teachings of all yoga and magic and religion. This is what I'm talking about. Where you say, then teach me. I won't try to escape from you. You keep pestering me. I'm not going to run away from you anymore. Tell me why you're here. And slowly, if you're silent enough, forget about third eyes, develop a third ear. And listen very calmly and quietly and still to your angst and pain and suffering and sorrow. Don't medicate it out of existence or try to silence it, because it's got an amazing story to tell you. And you see, the God force in this universe is not going to turn its volume up to be heard. You have to turn your racket down. It's always talking. It's always there, symbolically and in other forms of communication. But we have to turn our noise down, and suddenly you'll hear it there. It's always playing in the background. So, in short, the message of Shiva or Pluto, whatever you want, what tradition you're coming from, it's Jesus. It's the Jesus with the sword is very aligned to this. Other cultures have Durga, Kali. The message of this Holy Spirit is personal exorcism. The personal exorcism of anything that contravenes the recognition of your own perfection and of your own value. Meaning what? Do yourself a break and lay off the hunting for spiritual perfection and enlightenment. You already have it. You just don't know you have it because there's a welter of self-induced and also externally induced prohibitions and inhibitions and weights upon your shoulders, keeping you from the understanding of your own perfection. Then when you're under that weight, you're actually running around looking for truth and for gurus and for sanity. The weight is keeping you from being it already. You're not going to achieve this state from an act of doing. At least not in the way that the Western world understands the concept of doing. It's a very Zen Taoist thing. It's more like undoing. Ultimately, it's about being. It's the difference between life and lifestyle. In that mystery of releasing from your... And analyzing. We have to do what we're doing right now sitting in this room. We have to analyze the factors that are holding us down, that are chaining us. You go, look, I want to go here, and I'm blaming myself, and I'm terribly punitive to myself, and I show a lot of anger and aggression towards other people because I think they're getting in my way, and I'm not aware that I'm carrying an incredible load. I'm a bloody pack mule for somebody or something. It's like a balloon, a big hot air balloon that's chained to the ground. If you release the chains, the balloon rises of its own accord, and the natural forces take right over. But we have been duped into thinking that we're imperfect and fallen and horrible and rotten, and that you're just a sinner. But the magus does not convert sinners, like these demagogues that we've been looking at. The magus, the shaman, awakens the ready. It's a totally different concept. You're already, the teacher to become. You're going to become the teacher. And when you're ready, the teacher awakens you. Not converting sinners for a paycheck. So the study of all necrotic agencies, whether internal or external, this is what Pluto is going to be bringing in. But the masters have said, like Krishnamurti, for instance, and Alan Watts, and other American versions of the same thing, and many teachers I can think of. But we have funded and paid for teachers and churches, and we've built leviathans running around to find out what is enlightenment. We've bought into every kind of nonsense to find out what is God, what is tradition, what is enlightenment. And you know something? It might boil down to something very simple. It might boil down to simply the process of independence, as against the collectivism. It might be freeing others from the slavery to your emptiness and need. I need you, I'm empty, I need you, you're empty, you need me. And call that love, and call that relationship. When you free another from that kind of soft tyranny, maybe that is a path to enlightenment. Maybe when you're in a relationship and you say, we are in a relationship together as two individuals, and when you look like you're becoming dependent, I don't back it up. I step back. And if you fall, you fall. But I will not become your prop so that you can live in absence of selfhood, because then I'm contravening the Holy Spirit. And when you see me doing it, you likewise warn me. And when we do that, we have a healthy relationship. So we're each other's mirror, but we're also each other's teacher. And perhaps it's also this, that when you are no longer emotionally affected, and I mean negatively or positively, by what any other person does, says, or thinks about you. So give it some thought, because it might be very, very simple. But of course, we don't want to do that. And now we can barely clean up the mess we've made. Mankind's self-alienation has reached such a degree that it can experience its own destruction as an aesthetic pleasure of the first order, says Jerry Mander. Meaning the next big high for the human race that's so sullied now, you see, is that the Big Bang, the annihilation of our own being, corruption, going over the edge, might be the big thrill that's to come. There's an English writer called Douglas Adams who wrote the book A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Well, in the third book in that series, called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, that's exactly what the characters do. They pay millions of dollars to go forward in time, in a time machine, to sit in a place called the restaurant at the end of the universe, where they toast the second bang that destroys the cosmos. And they all cheer, and wait for this big thrill. You become so desensitized. But one cannot think of the ending of an old age and the beginning of a new one without understanding of a time of cleansing, as we've been saying. And at this time, says the Manichaean Psalms of Thomas, another book left out of the Bible, in there the Christ says that I will uproot the darkness and cast it out and plant the light in its place. I will uproot the evil and cast it out and plant good in its place. The world shall be full of glory, the earth shall be without suspicion. The whole world will contain the righteous, right? The righteous is the one who is in selfhood, who's been doing his homework. They of the earth shall dwell in peace. Right? He's saying those who are earthed will live in peace. Not those who are dreaming about Flash Gordons and other nonsense and religious bogeymen in the sky. There being no more rebel. See? No more rebel. Because rebellion is only one side of the coin. So no more rebel. Nobody living in contradistinction to the natural order from henceforth. No name of sin. See? No cruelty to the self. Sin is nothing more than cruelty to others and cruelty to yourself. No name of sin shall be uttered again. The rich ones of light shall rejoice on every side without any grief. That which the living ones took was saved. They will return again to that which was their own. Look at the word enlightenment. And just think for a moment how you've been trained to think of that word. You think of the word light in terms of what? Luminescence. But is there not another permutation of that word light? Think in terms of weight instead of luminescence. An amazing secret will come to you. What is enlightenment? Stop thinking of it in terms of light, because then you have an opposing of darkness. Think in terms of lightness. Yeah. Think in terms of the fool with his feather. The eagle crosses the sky. It doesn't even leave a trail to tell you it was there. The clouds exist without consciousness. They don't wind themselves up in the morning and go, oh God, got to get up and pass the heavens for these monks. They look beautiful. But they're there, aren't they? But are they doing anything? They're not a verb. We enslave others to our needs. Bruce Lee said something. He said that each moment that passes changes you. You cannot even own yourself. How can you ever hope to own anyone or anything else? You're passing through. You're in this moment. You must be in the now as a selfhood, because there is going to be this change coming. I think of a movie. I think of Werner Herzog, who I think, because I think very visually, and I cannot think in my mind actually, of a more beautiful rendition of this decay and entropy of civilization that I'm talking about. In the movie Nosferatu the Vampire, he shows this amazing scene set to the music of Richard Wagner, where the camera pans down onto an incredible street, civic square in Holland, where all the people are just insane. And they're all dancing and just, it's the end of the world. And through this incredible scene of just insanity is Lucy. Lucy is the light. And she's the only sane one. And she's walking through them all saying, but I know the reason for all this. I know I can teach you the reason for all of this. And nobody's listening. The sane person amongst the insane. The light amongst the unlight. Now, we've been talking a little bit as a theme all the way through this about the end of history. That 2012 is a sort of zero year, and there might be nothing beyond it. And there's another interesting thing that I want to bring to your attention, that the elites that might tie into all of this. We've been talking about some mystical stuff, but there's another more sinister understanding about what it might mean, why the remote viewers and other clairvoyants cannot see past the year 2012. Werner Vinge says that we are on the edge of a change comparable to the rise of human life on Earth. Within 30 years, we will have the technological means to create superhuman intelligence. Shortly after that, the human era will end. So he's talking about the replacement of the human being. Steve Quayle, in his book Genetic Armageddon, says that a terrifying future thunders toward mankind, an impending fate embodied by monstrous, blasphemous combinations of human and animal genetic materials, of man-machine cyborgs, and of beings not only with increased capacities and extended lifespan, but also with re-engineered morality void of compassion. So the emotionless person. You know, we have problems with our emotions, sure. But they're talking about no emotion. The future is so abhorrent as to almost defy the imagination. These new beings and the transhumanists looking forward to their arrival will not be benevolent. Just the opposite. Because the goal of those creating these beings will that they will be replaced, they'll be meant for a replacement of human beings. And that the new race will be post-humans. Now the word post-human sounds innocuous enough until one realizes that post means after. Well, they've been trying it for decades. They wanted to get rid of us long ago as the human species. But you see, we are needed for ritualistic purposes. And if they just replaced us with mechanical cyborgs long ago to serve them, then they wouldn't have had the blood. There's a whole ritualistic tie-in as to why we're kept alive. But you see, what they've thought is then, okay, well, the human being is not really a good machine to serve us because they're too rebellious. But we really prefer machines. But I guess what we can do is we can reduce the human being to the level of the machine. And then we win both ways across. And that's what they've been doing. But now, the game might change. I'm not saying I'm totally bought into this yet, but it's a very interesting theory. And by goodness, you only have to look around. It looks like it could be very much on its way. Would we buy into that? See, if we're not healthily dealing with our emotions, even we could get to the point where we dislike our emotions and want to tranquilize those. We might buy into something like that. Ludwig Feuerbach, the German philosopher, said that the present age prefers the sign to the thing signified, the copy to the original, presentation to reality, the appearance to the essence, illusion only as sacred, truth profane. Lewis Mumford, the sociologist, said that by his very success in inventing labor-saving devices, modern man has manufactured an abyss of boredom that only the privileged classes in earlier civilizations have ever fathomed. Theodore Roszak said that the whole force of urban industrialism upon our tastes is to convince us that artificiality is not only inevitable, but better. Well, if you won't be a whole person and a whole self, then don't blame history for moving in this direction. Dr. Michael Elner, a hypnotist, said, just look at us. Everything is backwards. Everything is upside down. Doctors destroy health. Lawyers destroy justice. Universities destroy knowledge. Governments destroy freedom. The major media destroys information. And religion destroys spirituality. As Voltaire said, the ancient Romans built their greatest masterpieces of architecture. Yes, for wild beasts to fight in. So this action of Shiva, or Pluto, is what the Hopis describe as Koyanets Katsi. Fake life. Imbalanced life that calls for another way of being. It's a divestiture. What the alchemists call calcinatio, dissolution. It's a different kind of action than probably what we're used to. Until we get savvy about it and understand its nature. But one thing also to understand is this. That Pluto is on its way. Period. You can't stop the action of nature. Because, as I said, Pluto represents nature's hygienist, a psychic surgeon, come here to test our immunity. So the only trick is that you go with it. It's here to bring about a chemical divorce. It's here to understand if we have grasped this law of deconstruction. So you can either go through it willfully, or, as the tarot beautifully describes, it will occur in a more violent way. So you do get a choice. But if the system is too rigid, you see? If the complex, if the structures, if the lie is far too rigid and the toxicity too much, then the tower shows you later on what will happen. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're into the realm of symbolism and metaphor, you will realize that America has already had its warning. But if you have no symbolic literacy, then you don't see it. You just accept it on the face value of an event in time and space. But when you start to step back from that canvas of life, you'll start to realize we are being given our little warnings about what's coming. Even the media, the ad copy, we're being told a lot of amazing, interesting things if we know how to look at it. We've been talking about time and cycles all the way through this presentation and how important they are. As we saw, Carl Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop from facing their souls. You've heard me put it differently. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to stop facing their shadow self. And that's an enormous problem. You won't face it, but you will project it on somebody else and curse them out and then destroy their innocent lives, or not so innocent, by your projections. That you can manage to do. But see, Shiva, the dynamic has changed. Shiva is the shadow. So to attain true enlightenment is to return to selfhood, right? But did you see in the schemata that we had? Do you see that? That between the ego and the self, to get there, you have to pass through the shadow realm. You might want Shakti because she's gorgeous. She's beautiful. She's real. But you've got to pass through Shiva first. So that's why all this elaboration. Because yes, there is a selfhood. There is a place to return to. But you can't do it without integrating your shadow. You must pass through the cycle of the underworld. And all civilizations do it. And we know that is happening because of the movement of the archetypes. Vernon Howard put it this way. Human sickness is so severe that few can bear to look at it. But those who do will become well. And a picture of the man on the left is Ezra Pound, America's greatest poet. A great teacher, if ever there was one, on these shores. He was locked up for 13 years in Bellevue Mental Asylum. This is what America does with its teachers. And every day that his wife came to visit him in those years, she was searched at the door. Even after everyone knew he's a cool guy, he's all right, he's been locked up erroneously or whatever, because he suffered for what he taught. But still, the guards searched his wife. Then a young man who believed that he had been hard done by, out of the millions of his friends who let him down, in the world who didn't peep, a man by the name of Eustace Mullins took himself up to Bellevue and said, I want to interview this terrible super racist, this fascist, this maniac, this conspiratorialist. But he was at one point, and in any book today, and Who's Who, he's the greatest poet that America ever produced. With Wallace Stevens and Sylvia Plath coming afterwards, in my opinion. So Eustace Mullins goes up there, and Ezra basically just pulls out a dollar bill and goes, get your ass back down to that Library of Congress where you work and research this dollar bill until you know the meaning of all the symbols on it. Take it easy. Eustace Mullins did exactly as he was told and started to find out what the raving lunatic Ezra Pound had been saying. And then wrote many volumes, which I hope that American people are very familiar with. Why am I saying this? Is because we have to have some relief to ourselves. We must give ourselves a little bit of credit. The things that we're discovering and studying in the conspiratorial movement is very, very recent. This is what I'm talking about is just after the Second World War. And then Mullins starting to write, his books up through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and then you've had a few others. See, in England and Europe, we've had a few other authors, like the Nesta Websters, going a little bit back, and so on. But in an American context, the fact that we, as ordinary people, even have an Alex Jones, or anyone, is a miracle to me. It is brilliant. So when you're getting pessimistic, and you're seeing all, and fatalistic, you see, and horrified, for a moment think that it's extremely recent times that we've even had the privilege of discovering this. I can even probably date, I would really say from the time of Eustace Mullins, it dates. Because he's the one who named the names. It's not that people didn't talk about conspiracy before that, but they were maybe politicians who maybe mentioned it once or twice on the House of the Congress or something like that. But a man who sat down and named names and drew pictures and showed you the symbolism, that is a very recent phenomenon. And it was inspired by this man, this great being, who suffered so immeasurably they destroyed his life. After 13 years in that place. And the message is this, that the mass opposition to these tyrants is relatively recent phenomenon, historically speaking. What we're doing is like a tyrant, you can imagine the tyrant is the tiger hiding in the long grass. We are slowly burning down the camouflage, bit by bit. But this requires the hunter's instinct and the hunter's patience. So I don't want anybody else, I don't care what you're watching on that horror device, courtesy of the Queen, and the tremors of pain and suffering and showing you. Absolutely do not get pessimistic at all, because we are doing wonderful. The opposition has never been before. There has never been in history a true opposition to the forces that we're now discovering. Our forefathers died in factories and mines and barely lived to 25 years of age. They had no newspapers, no internet, no nothing. We have all of these things, and we have now begun to have a glimpse into the hidden establishment that's been preying over the human race for aeons of time. And this is what we need to stay focused on. The spirit of rebellion is on its way. If it's in you already, fantastic. If you have that plutonic, Uranian, Aquarian energy, brilliant. It will be operating in the world, strengthening the psychic emotional immunity. It means that we have to fall in love with the word no. That simple 2-letter word would mean so much in the body politic, in society, and in our slaveries that we involve ourselves in every day, that we allow. Remember I told you it's not about have I been sold a lie, it's have I bought one? When you understand that dynamic, then you're saying no to all tyranny, no matter where it comes from. Vernon Howard said also, we can accept that God becomes man to save man, but we can never seem to accept man becoming God to save himself. And I'll leave you with this from the Hopi elders. All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration, because we are the ones we have been waiting for. Thank you very much. So let's take a few questions if we can. Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
You have to come over here for the questions. Thank you, Michael.
Turn them on.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your enlightenment.
Thank you.
And the independence to think.
Right.
Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned the trauma that affected humans, that detached ourselves